Welcome. Find a comfortable position. Perhaps adjust your pillow and let yourself settle in. Take a deep breath. Release any tension you're holding. Tonight, we're going to spend some time in a place of quiet contemplation and gentle repetitive work. We're visiting a medieval monastery garden somewhere in the English countryside in the year 1347. There's no drama here, no great events, no urgent crises, just the slow turning of seasons, the patient tending of plants, and the soft rhythm of daily tasks that have been performed in much the same way for hundreds of years. This is a story without conflict, without resolution. It simply is, as the garden simply is, existing in its own timeless cycle. The garden we're visiting belongs to a Benedictine monastery. It's not a grand place, not one of the great abbeys you might have heard of. The monastery itself is modest, home to perhaps 20 monks and a handful of lay brothers who help with the heavier work. The garden reflects this humble scale. It measures roughly 60 paces long and 40 paces wide. Not large, but sufficient. Sufficient to feed the community through the year, with careful planning and patient work. The walls surrounding the garden are made of local stone, quarried from the grey limestone that runs beneath this part of England. The stones are weathered, softened by decades of rain and frost and sun. Lichen grows on them, pale green and yellow patches that spread slowly, year by year. In the shadier corners, moss has taken hold, soft and velvety to the touch. The walls have stood for nearly a century now. These walls have a history. The stones were quarried from a hillside 3 miles distant and carried here on ox carts, one load at a time, over the course of several summers. Men long dead cut those stones, shaped them, lifted them into place. The mortar between the stones has aged to a pale cream color, almost white in places where the sun hits strongest. In some places, it's crumbling slightly, returning to dust. Small ferns have taken root in the gaps, their delicate fronds waving in the breeze. No one minds. The walls are still solid, still doing their job of sheltering the garden from the worst of the winds that sweep across the open fields beyond. Our guide through this space is Brother Thomas. He is 43 years old, though in truth he's never given much thought to his exact age. Time is marked differently in the monastery. There are feast days and fast days, the cycle of liturgical seasons, the rhythm of prayer services marking each day. But individual years blur together, one much like another. And that's not seen as a problem. It simply is. Brother Thomas came to the monastery as a boy of 12. His family, poor tenant farmers, had too many sons and not enough land. The monastery offered education, security, a life of meaning. He took his vows at 18 and has been here ever since. The garden became his particular responsibility about 15 years ago, when the previous gardener, Brother Anselm, grew too old and stiff in his joints to manage the heavier work. Brother Anselm lived another 5 years after that, sitting in the sun on the bench by the well, offering advice and sharing stories from his own decades of gardening. He's buried now in the monastery's small cemetery, beneath a simple wooden cross that's beginning to rot and lean with age. Brother Thomas is not a learned man in the way that Brother Geoffrey, who tends the scriptorium, is learned. He cannot read Latin with ease, though he can manage the necessary prayers. He knows his letters well enough to read simple texts in English, and he can sign his name, though his handwriting is labored and unpracticed. But books and scholarly pursuits have never called to him the way the garden has. When Brother Geoffrey speaks of ancient texts and theological debates, Brother Thomas listens politely, but without real comprehension or interest. His learning is of a different kind. He knows the garden in a way that goes beyond words or written knowledge. He knows when to plant each seed by watching the hawthorn bushes and listening for the cuckoo's call. He knows which herbs prefer shade by the way their leaves cup and turn. He knows how to tell if the soil needs more manure by its color, its texture, even its smell. He knows which plants can sit companionably next to one another, and which prefer their own space. He knows these things in his bones, in his hands, in the accumulated experience of 15 years of daily attention. And before that, the wisdom passed down from Brother Anselm, and before that, from gardeners whose names are now forgotten. Brother Thomas is of medium height, neither particularly tall nor short. His build is solid, strong from years of physical work, though beginning to thicken slightly around the middle as he moves through his 40s. His hands are broad and capable, the hands of a working man. The palms are calloused, the skin tough and weathered. His fingernails are permanently stained with soil, dark crescents that remain no matter how thoroughly he scrubs them. He has tried occasionally, especially before major feast days, to scrub them completely clean with sand and water. But the earth seems to have become part of him. After a while, he stopped trying. What does it matter? God sees the heart, not the fingernails. His face is weathered, deeply lined from long hours in sun and wind. The lines around his eyes are particularly pronounced. Crow's feet from squinting at plants, from scanning the sky for weather signs. His nose is large and slightly crooked, broken years ago in a fall from a ladder. His hair, what remains of it around his tonsure, is mostly grey now, though there are still a few strands of the brown it used to be. In summer, his face and the back of his neck turn brown as old leather. In winter, he becomes pale again, the tan fading to a weathered grey pink. He walks with a slight limp, the result of dropping a large stone on his foot several years ago. The stone was part of a wall repair project, and it slipped from his grasp, landing squarely on his left foot. The foot swelled enormously, turned purple and black, and took months to heal. It healed, but it's never been quite the same. In cold weather, it aches with a deep, persistent throb. In damp weather, it stiffens. Brother Thomas has learned to favor it slightly, to shift his weight, to work around the limitation. This is his thorn in the flesh, his small suffering, and he accepts it as such. The monastery day begins early, very early by modern standards. In winter, the first bell rings while it's still full dark, perhaps 4 or 5 in the morning. In summer, when the dawn comes early, the bell rings with the first light, perhaps around 4:30. The bell is rung by whoever has been assigned the task that week, usually one of the younger monks. They pull the rope, and the bell in the tower swings and clangs, a sound that carries across the monastery grounds, across the fields beyond, a sound so familiar that everyone within hearing barely registers it consciously. But their bodies know. Time to wake, time to rise. Brother Thomas rises with the others. He sleeps in the dormitory, A long room with rows of simple beds, each with a straw mattress and rough wool blankets. There's no privacy, no personal space beyond each bed. He pulls on his habit, splashes cold water on his face from a basin near the door, and files into the chapel with the others for matins, the first prayer service of the day. His knees are a bit stiff these mornings, especially in cold weather. The stone floor of the chapel is unforgiving, and the cold seeps up through his sandals, through the thin leather soles, into his feet and legs. He stands and sits and kneels with the rhythm of the prayers, his body moving through the familiar motions while his mind is already half turned toward the garden. Did those lettuce seedlings survive the night's frost? Do the new bean shoots need watering? Is it time yet to harvest the early radishes? Has that patch of ground elder spread further? Should he cut back the mint today, or wait another few days? After matins comes Lord's, as the first grey light begins to show in the eastern sky. The chapel windows are simple openings with wooden shutters, no glass. In winter, the shutters are closed to keep out the worst of the cold, and the chapel is lit by candles and rushlights. In summer, the shutters are opened wide, and the chapel fills with early morning light and the sound of birdsong. The windows begin to show the quality of the coming day. Grey light means rain, perhaps. Golden light promises sun. A reddish tinge might mean wind later. Brother Thomas has learned to read these signs over the years, as any outdoor worker must. Then comes a period of reading or meditation, perhaps an hour. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs their lives, prescribes certain hours for prayer, certain hours for work, and certain hours for reading and contemplation. Brother Thomas usually sits in the cloister during this time, near enough to see into the garden through the archway. The cloister is a covered walkway that runs around an open courtyard. The stone columns are simple, without elaborate carving or decoration. The roof is wooden, weathered, and dark. The floor is worn smooth by generations of sandaled feet, dipping slightly in the most travelled paths. He watches the light change, gradual and subtle. He notes which beds are catching the early sun and which are still in shadow. He listens to the birds beginning their morning conversations. There are sparrows nesting in the eaves, common little brown birds that chatter constantly. Blackbirds that hop along the garden paths, cocking their heads to listen for worms. A family of wrens that live somewhere in the stone wall. Tiny birds with surprisingly loud voices. In spring and summer, their songs fill the morning air, a complex chorus of chirps and whistles and trills. In winter, they're quieter, but still present, still alive, still claiming their territories and seeking their food. This time before full daylight is peaceful. The monastery is waking slowly, gently. Other monks sit in the cloister, some reading from their breviaries, small prayer books containing the daily offices. Some simply sit in quiet contemplation, hands folded, eyes closed or fixed on the middle distance. There's no requirement to speak. The rule of Saint Benedict values silence as much as prayer, perhaps more. Silence is where God speaks, the abbot sometimes says. Silence is where we learn to listen. Brother Thomas finds this morning silence deeply restful. His mind, which can race with tasks and worries during the day, settles. The concerns of the previous day fade. The anxieties about the day ahead haven't yet formed. He becomes present in this moment, in this place. The cool air on his face, The stone seat beneath him, cold and hard. The gradual brightening of the sky, grey to pink, to pale blue. The sound of his own breathing, steady and slow. Soon the bell will ring for prime. Another prayer service, shorter than matins. Then will come breakfast, and then the working day will truly begin. But for now, there's this quiet space, this gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness, from darkness to light, from the private world of dreams to the communal world of the monastery. The monastery grounds are extensive, though much of the land is given over to fields where tenant farmers grow grain for the community. Wheat and barley mostly, which will be ground into flour for bread. The garden is separate from these fields, enclosed and protected, intended specifically for vegetables, herbs, and fruit trees. Everything grown in the garden is for the monastery's own use, not for sale or trade. It's what feeds them through the year. Beyond the garden walls, Brother Thomas can hear the sounds of the monastery coming to life. The clank of buckets from the well in the main courtyard, where the kitchen servants are drawing water for the day's cooking. The shuffle of feet on stone. Monks making their way from dormitory to chapel to refectory. Somewhere, someone is coughing. A deep, rattling cough that echoes in the cold morning air. Brother Thomas makes a mental note to prepare a syrup of honey and thyme, good for chest complaints. Brother Peter, probably, who has been coughing for a week now and refuses to rest properly. The sky continues to lighten. Colors begin to emerge from the darkness. The stone over the walls shifts from black to grey to warm honey-colored, where the first rays of sun touch them. The garden beds, barely visible at first, just darker shapes against darkness, become distinct. Brother Thomas can make out the silhouettes of the fruit trees, their bare branches reaching upward like fingers, or like prayers. It's going to be a clear day, he thinks. Good. There's much to do, and rain would make some tasks difficult, though not impossible. Though rain has its place too. The garden needs rain. Everything needs rain. But today, sun will be welcome. He has seedlings to transplant, and they'll settle in better on a dry day than a wet one. Let's take a moment to understand the layout of this garden in greater detail. To see it as Brother Thomas sees it. Imagine you're standing at the entrance, a simple wooden gate set into the stone wall. The morning is cool, but not cold. It's late March and spring is arriving. There's dew on everything, thousands upon thousands of tiny droplets catching the early morning light like scattered diamonds. If you breathe deeply, you can smell the earth, damp and rich and alive. Mixed with that fundamental earth smell is the faint scent of herbs, just beginning to grow again after their winter dormancy, and the subtle perfume of last year's composted leaves, sweet decay transformed into new life. The gate itself is made of oak, that strongest of English woods. It's weathered to a silvery greys by years of sun and rain and snow. The wood has aged beautifully, taking on a soft patina that new wood never has. It's held together with iron bands across the top and bottom, and with heavy nails, hand-forged by the monastery's blacksmith or purchased from the smith in the village. The nail heads show rust despite being regularly treated with tallow to protect them from the weather. The wood has warped slightly over time, as wood does, and the gate scrapes the ground a bit when opened, leaving an arc in the packed earth. Brother Thomas keeps meaning to plane down the bottom edge, to make the gate swing more freely, But somehow other tasks always take precedence. It's been on his mental list for 3 years now. The garden is divided into several distinct areas, each with its purpose, each carefully planned and maintained. Directly ahead, running down the center like the aisle of a church, is the main path. It's packed earth, worn smooth by years of footsteps, compacted by countless trips with wheelbarrows and buckets, by the daily traffic of gardening. The path is about 4 feet wide enough for Brother Thomas to push his wooden wheelbarrow along it without difficulty, but not so wide as to waste space. Every square foot matters in a garden this size. The edges of the path have become slightly raised over time, built up gradually by soil that's been scattered from the beds, by the slow accumulation of displaced earth. These raised edges help define the path, keep it distinct from the growing areas. In wet weather, the path can become muddy, but it drains reasonably well. In very dry weather, it becomes dusty, and every footstep raises a small puff of fine soil. On either side of this central path are the raised beds where vegetables grow. These beds are the heart of the garden, the reason for its existence, the source of the food that helps keep the community alive. The monks have built these beds up over years, decades really, adding layer upon layer of soil, compost, and manure. Each bed is about 3 feet wide and varies in length, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet, depending on what's planted there and where it fits in the overall layout. The width is deliberate, carefully thought out. A man can reach into the center of a 3 foot wide bed from either side without stepping on the soil itself, without compacting it with his weight. This is important. Soil that's been walked on becomes compacted, dense, less able to hold air and water, less friendly to plant roots. The beds stay light and fluffy, full of air spaces, easy for roots to penetrate. This is one of the fundamental principles Brother Thomas learned from Brother Anselm, who learned it from the gardener before him. Never step on your growing beds. Walk on the paths. Reach in from the sides, but keep your weight off the soil where things grow. The beds are bordered by woven willow hurdles, flexible panels made by weaving thin willow withes around upright stakes. These hurdles serve multiple purposes. They hold the soil in place, preventing it from spilling onto the paths. They create visual definition, making the garden look ordered and intentional. And they provide some protection from wind, creating small microclimates within the garden where tender plants can find shelter. But willow hurdles don't last forever. They rot and weaken over time, especially at the base where they meet the constantly damp soil. Every few years, sections need to be replaced. The willow comes from trees that grow along the river about a mile from the monastery. Pollarded trees that are cut back regularly to produce straight, flexible shoots. In winter, when the willows are dormant and the sap is down, Brother Thomas walks down there with pruning shears and a leather strap for tying bundles. He cuts year-old growth, collecting bundles of long straight shoots, each about as thick as his thumb. Later, back at the garden, he'll weave this into new hurdles. A task for winter afternoons when outdoor work is limited by weather and short days. The height of the beds makes them easier to tend without excessive stooping, a consideration that becomes more important with each passing year. Brother Thomas appreciates this more now than he did when he was younger. The beds sit about a foot above the level of the paths, which means less bending, less strain on the lower back and knees. When he weeds or plants or harvests, he can often kneel beside a bed rather than bending double, and kneeling is easier on the body, easier to sustain for the long periods that careful garden work requires. To the left side of the garden, nearest the monastery wall, is the herb garden. This section is more intricate than the vegetable beds, divided into smaller squares and rectangles, bordered with low hedges of lavender and box. The layout is almost geometric, a pattern of squares within squares, a design that's both functional and beautiful. This design isn't merely decorative, though it certainly is pleasing to the eye, satisfying in its symmetry and order. It's practical. Each square contains a different herb, and the hedges keep them separate, creating boundaries, preventing the more aggressive plants from overwhelming the gentler ones. The box hedges are very old, perhaps as old as the garden itself. Box grows slowly, adding just an inch or two each year. These hedges are about 18 inches tall, clipped neatly each summer to maintain their shape. The leaves are small, dark green, densely packed on woody stems. They have a distinctive smell, slightly sharp, slightly acrid, not entirely pleasant, but somehow fitting for their purpose. The lavender hedges are younger, replaced every 15 or 20 years when they become too woody and sparse. Lavender is a Mediterranean plant, and while it survives the English climate, it doesn't thrive quite as vigorously as it would in a warmer, drier place. Still, it does well enough. In late summer, the lavender hedges will be covered with purple-blue flower spikes, and the whole area will hum with bees. But now, in late March, they're just beginning to show new grey-green growth at the tips of their branches. Within these hedged sections grow the medicinal and culinary herbs that the monastery depends on. Sage, rosemary, thyme, mint, fennel, parsley, dill, chamomile, rue, wormwood, hyssop, lovage, marjoram, basil in summer, and many others. Each has been carefully placed according to its needs and habits. Sun-loving herbs in the sunniest spots. Shade-tolerant herbs where the walls cast shadows. Herbs that prefer dry conditions in the raised, well-drained areas. Herbs that need more moisture in the lower, damper spots. Sage grows in a sunny spot near the center of the herb garden. Its soft, grey-green leaves are covered in fine hairs that give them a distinctive velvety texture. When you rub a leaf between your fingers, it releases a powerful, earthy scent, pungent and medicinal. Sage is used for strengthening the memory and settling the stomach. It's also used in cooking, particularly with fatty meats, which the monks eat rarely, only on major feast days. But they do eat it then, and the sage is essential. The monks make a tea from the leaves, steeping them in hot water until the liquid turns pale green and takes on the herb's distinctive flavor. The tea is bitter, but in a pleasant way, and it's said to be particularly good for older people, helping to preserve the mind and the memory. Rosemary prefers the warmest, driest spot in the herb garden, right up against the south-facing wall. It's a Mediterranean plant through and through, and while it survives the English climate, it appreciates all the warmth it can get. The wall acts as a heat sink, absorbing warmth during the day and radiating it back at night, creating a little microclimate that's just enough to keep the rosemary happy. The needle-like leaves stay green through winter, one of the few herbs that doesn't die back completely. Rosemary is used for headaches, added to bathwater for its refreshing scent, and burned as incense in the chapel on special occasions. The smell is sharp, clean, almost piercing. Brother Thomas loves it. Thyme spreads in a low mat, its tiny leaves and stems forming a dense carpet. You can step on thyme, and it releases its scent with each footfall. In fact, there's a small thyme path through the herb garden, living pathway, that's kept trimmed by use. There are several varieties of thyme in the garden. Common thyme, with its small purple flowers in summer. Lemon thyme, which has a citrus scent when crushed. Wild thyme, gathered from the hills and transplanted here, low and creeping. All are useful for coughs and digestive troubles, and they flavor many dishes in the monastery kitchen. Brother Martin is particularly fond of thyme in his bean soup. Mint is kept in its own area, and even then, Brother Thomas must be vigilant. Mint spreads by underground runners, rhizomes that creep through the soil, sending up new shoots at intervals. If left unchecked, mint would take over the entire herb garden within a few years. He's planted it in a corner where he can easily cut it back, and he digs up the spreading runners regularly, sometimes every few weeks during the growing season. He's tried planting mint in buried pots to contain the roots, but the runners always find a way out, or over the rim, or through drainage holes. Mint is determined. Despite being somewhat troublesome, mint is too useful to do without. It flavors drinks, both hot and cold. It aids digestion, particularly after rich meals. It can be made into a cooling salve for hot skin, for the rashes that sometimes afflict the monks in summer. And the smell is wonderful, fresh and clean and invigorating. Fennel grows tall in its designated spot, already reaching toward the sky even though it's only March. By midsummer, it will be shoulder high, taller than Brother Thomas himself, topped with umbels of tiny yellow flowers that look like golden lace. The leaves are feathery, so fine they're almost like green smoke. The seeds are collected in autumn and used to flavor bread and to settle stomach complaints. They have a taste like anise, sweet and slightly sharp. The leaves can be added to fish dishes, which the monastery eats on Fridays and during Lent, and on all the other fast days prescribed by the church, which means they eat fish quite often, actually. Fresh fennel leaves make fish taste less fishy, which is appreciated by many of the monks, though Brother Thomas rather likes the taste of fish as it is. Parsley grows in a slightly shaded spot, beneath the spreading branches of an old apple tree that overhangs this part of the garden. Parsley is notoriously slow to germinate, often taking 3 or 4 weeks to sprout. There's an old saying that parsley goes to the devil and back 7 times before it sprouts, and Brother Thomas can believe it. He always soaks the seeds overnight before planting them, which seems to help, though he's not sure why. Once established, parsley produces abundantly, sending up fresh leaves constantly through spring, summer, and into autumn. The leaves are bright green, intricately divided, beautiful in their complexity. They're added to soups and stews, and the monks believe parsley freshens the breath and cleanses the blood, both of which may be true or may not be. Brother Thomas is practical about such things. He knows what works in the garden, and he trusts that knowledge more than he trusts theoretical explanations of why things work. To the right side of the garden, you'll find the larger vegetables, the staples that fill bellies and sustain life. Cabbages, which will grow to impressive sizes by autumn, their round heads dense and heavy as stones. Onions and leeks, planted in neat rows, their green shoots already showing. Peas and beans, which will be trained up wooden supports as they grow, climbing toward the sky. Root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, turnips and beets, all of which can be stored through the winter in the cool cellar beneath the refectory, packed in sand to keep them from drying out or rotting. The vegetable beds are organized with an eye toward crop rotation, a principle that Brother Thomas learned from Brother Anselm, who learned it from the gardener before him, knowledge passed down through generations. The principle is simple but essential. Don't grow the same type of crop in the same bed year after year. Different plants take different nutrients from the soil. Brassicas, cabbages, kale, broccoli are heavy feeders, taking lots of nitrogen. Legumes, peas, beans actually add nitrogen to the soil through their roots. Root vegetables are moderate feeders, happy with average soil. Rotating crops helps maintain soil fertility and reduces problems with pests and diseases. Though Brother Thomas doesn't fully understand the mechanisms, he just knows it works. This year, the bed that grew beans last year will grow cabbages. The bed that grew cabbages will grow onions. The bed that grew onions will be planted with peas. The bed that grew peas will receive a good layer of compost and grow beans again. A 4-year rotation, simple and effective, tried and tested over centuries of monastic gardening. At the far end of the garden, furthest from the gate, is the orchard area. It's not grand, nothing like the extensive orchards of the great abbeys. Just 6 apple trees of different varieties, 2 pear trees, and a single plum tree. These were planted before Brother Thomas's time, perhaps 30 or 40 years ago, and they're now mature enough to give good harvests most years, barring disasters like late frosts that kill the blossoms, or severe summer droughts that cause the fruit to drop prematurely. Each tree has its own character, its own personality almost. The oldest apple tree in the corner is gnarled and twisted, its trunk showing the scars of decades of weather and pruning and simple age. The bark is deeply furrowed, rough as bark can be, with deep channels running vertically up the trunk. But despite its appearance, twisted and ancient-looking, it still produces beautiful fruit. Medium-sized apples with red-streaked yellow skin and crisp, sweet flesh that's perfect for eating fresh. These apples ripen in late September and store well through winter, often lasting until March or April, if kept properly cool and dry. Another apple tree gives small, very tart fruit that ripens early in late July. These don't keep at all, barely awake after picking before they start to go soft and brown. But they make excellent sauce when cooked with honey, perfect for serving with the rich meat dishes of major feast days. A third tree produces large, green cooking apples, sour and hard when raw but perfect for baking, their flesh breaking down into a fluffy consistency when heated. The remaining apple trees give various other varieties, providing a succession of fruit from late summer through autumn. Different types for different purposes, a carefully curated collection. The pear trees stand near the eastern wall, elegant in their form even when bare. Pear trees are beautiful in a way that apple trees aren't. Their bark is smooth and grey, not rough and furrowed. Their branches reach upward more than spreading outward, giving them a more vertical, reaching quality. In spring, they cover themselves in white blossoms, clouds of the white flowers that glow against the grey stone wall behind them. The fruit they give is delicate, must be harvested at exactly the right moment and eaten soon after. Pears don't store like apples. A few days too early, and they're hard and flavourless. A few days too late, and they're mushy and beginning to rot. But caught at precisely the right moment. A perfectly ripe pear is one of life's great pleasures. Sweet and juicy, with that characteristic granular texture, that slight grittiness that's somehow perfect. The monks look forward to pear season all year. The plum tree stands alone near the well, smaller than the other fruit trees, less imposing. It's an unreliable bearer, producing abundantly some years and almost nothing others. Brother Thomas has never understood the pattern. Some years it's loaded with fruit, branches bending under the weight, plums dropping to the ground faster than they can be gathered. Other years, it produces perhaps a dozen plums, barely worth the bother of harvesting. The plums themselves are dark purple, almost black, with yellow flesh that's quite tart, too sour to eat raw in any quantity. But Brother Martin, the cook, makes them into a conserve with honey and spices, and that conserve is delicious spread on bread, a special treat saved for feast days. Beneath the fruit trees grow additional herbs and wildflowers. The monks have deliberately allowed some beneficial weeds to remain here. Nettles, those stinging plants that everyone curses when they brush against them with bare skin, can actually be cooked as greens in early spring. The young leaves, before the plants flower, are nutritious and surprisingly tasty when boiled. And nettle tea is said to be strengthening, good for the blood. Dandelions grow here too, their sunny yellow flowers appearing in early spring, their jagged leaves rising from a central rosette. The young leaves are good in salads, slightly bitter, but in a pleasant way. The roots can be dug, dried, and ground to make a warming drink that's used in place of expensive imported spices. Violets grow in patches beneath the trees, their heart-shaped leaves staying green through much of the winter, their small purple flowers appearing in early spring, sometimes even in late winter if the weather is mild. The flowers can be candied for special occasions, preserved in egg white and sugar, turned into tiny purple decorations for cakes and pastries. The leaves have medicinal uses, good for coughs and chest complaints. Primroses also thrive in the partial shade beneath the trees, their pale yellow flowers like small stars. They're one of the first flowers of spring, appearing even before the daffodils, a promise that winter will end, that warmth will return, that the world will bloom again. Ground ivy creeps through the grass beneath the trees, a low-growing plant with scalloped, kidney-shaped leaves and small purple flowers. It's a persistent plant, hard to remove once established, but Brother Thomas doesn't mind it here. It's not competing with cultivated crops, and its leaves can be made into a tea that's said to be good for the lungs. Along the southern wall, which receives the most sun throughout the day, Brother Thomas has trained grapevines. These were planted about 10 years ago, cuttings obtained from another monastery 30 miles away. The vines are still relatively young for the grapes, which can live and produce for decades or even centuries. But they're beginning to bear reasonable crops now. The grapes are small and tart, not really suitable for eating fresh. They're wine grapes, theoretically, but the monastery doesn't make wine. That's a more complex process requiring equipment and expertise they don't have. But the grapes can be gathered and pressed to make verjuice, the sour juice used in cooking much as vinegar might be. Verjuice adds acidity to dishes, brightens flavors, helps cut through the richness of fatty foods. The wall itself plays a crucial role in making the vines successful. Stone walls are marvelous things for creating microclimates. The stone absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly through the evening and night, giving the vines a few extra degrees of warmth. In this way, plants that prefer Mediterranean climates can sometimes be coaxed to grow in England, though they'll never thrive quite as they would in their native lands. There is a well in one corner of the garden, essential to everything that grows here. The well is deep, perhaps 30 feet, lined with carefully fitted stones for its full depth. The water at the bottom is cold and clean, fed by an underground spring that has never failed. Not in living memory, not even during the drought years. Drawing water from this well is one of the most frequent tasks of gardening. Plants need water. All plants, all the time. Some need more, some less, but all need some. The bucket is made of wood, oak-shaped and fitted by a cooper, bound with iron hoops to hold it together. It's heavy when full, perhaps 40 pounds of water, plus the weight of the bucket itself. Brother Thomas has developed a technique for hauling it up over the years. He doesn't just pull with his arms. He uses his whole body, engaging his back and legs, hand over hand on the rope, a rhythm that makes the work sustainable. Haul, haul, haul. The bucket rises from the depths, dripping, sloshing slightly. It emerges into sunlight, and the water sparkles. Near the well stands a wooden bench, weathered and smooth. The wood has aged to a silvery grey, beautiful in its simplicity. The surface is worn smooth by years of sitting, by the friction of woolen habits against wood. Brother Thomas sometimes sits here in the evening, after compline, the last service of the day. He sits quietly, resting his feet, listening to the garden settling into darkness. The bench faces west, and on clear evenings, he can watch the sunset, watch the sky go through its gradual transformation from blue to gold to pink to deep purple to black. It's not required. It's not part of his duties, but it feeds something in him. This quiet watching, this attention to beauty. There's also a small storage shed, really just a lean-to against the wall, where tools are kept. The shed is simple, almost crude, built from rough-cut boards that have weathered to grey. The roof is thatch, needing replacement every few years. Inside, the shed smells of damp wood and earth and the faint metallic scent of iron tools. It's not an unpleasant smell. It's the smell of work, of productivity, of purposeful activity. Inside, hanging from wooden pegs or leaning against the walls, are the implements of gardening, spades with worn wooden handles, smooth from use. Hoes of various sizes, from a large one for earthing up potatoes to a small one for detailed work among seedlings. Rakes for gathering leaves and smoothing soil. A wooden wheelbarrow with an iron-rimmed wheel that creaks slightly when it turns. Coils of hemp rope, useful for countless tasks. Clay pots of various sizes for growing seedlings or forcing bulbs. Wicker baskets for harvesting, woven from local willow by a woman in the village who specializes in such things. And the leather gloves worn for pruning roses, thick enough to protect against thorns, though Brother Thomas rarely bothers with them. His hands are tough enough. The shed is dim inside, lit only by the light that comes through gaps in the boards and through the open door. But everything has its place. Brother Thomas knows where each tool hangs, could find what he needs even in darkness by touch alone. This is his domain, organized according to his own logic, efficient and practical. Next to the shed are the compost heaps, 3 of them in various stages of decomposition. They're not attractive features of the garden, so they're tucked away where visitors won't immediately see them. But to Brother Thomas, they're beautiful in their way, because they represent the garden's fertility, the transformation of waste into wealth, the cycle of death and life made visible and tangible. These heaps are where everything comes full circle, where endings become beginnings. It's a morning in late March, and the world is waking from winter's sleep. The air still holds a chill. You can see your breath when you exhale. Small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly. But there's a softness to the chill now that wasn't there a month ago. The edge has gone from the cold. Winter is releasing its grip, slowly, reluctantly, but unmistakably. You can feel it in the air, see it in the light, hear it in the birdsong. Brother Thomas finishes his breakfast of dark bread and weak ale in the refectory. Breakfast is eaten in silence, as are all meals in the monastery. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribes silence during meals, with one monk reading aloud from a religious text while the others eat. Today's reading is from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, familiar words that Brother Thomas has heard dozens of times. He listens with half his attention while eating steadily, methodically. The bread is coarse, dark brown, made from flour that includes the bran and germ of the grain, nothing refined or whitened. It's dense, heavy, filling. It sticks in your throat a bit if you try to eat it too fast. The ale is thin, more like water than what we'd think of as ale today, with only a small amount of alcohol. It's safer to drink than water straight from most wells, which might carry disease. And it provides a bit of nourishment, some calories from the grain it's brewed from. He makes his way to the garden after breakfast, his feet knowing the path without conscious thought, through the cloister, where the light is still dim and cool, across the small courtyard, where puddles from yesterday's rain reflect the grey sky, past the chapel entrance where the old roses are just beginning to show tiny red shoots of new growth, little points of colour against the brown woody stems. The gate creaks slightly as he pushes it open, a familiar sound, almost musical in its way. He should oil those hinges, he thinks, as he thinks almost every morning. But he never quite gets around to it, and truthfully, he rather likes the sound. It's familiar. It marks the transition from the monastery proper into his domain, the space he tends, the space that depends on him and on which he depends. The garden in early morning is a different place from the garden at midday or evening. The air is fresher, cooler, scented differently. Everything seems more alive, more present. The dew coats every surface, thousands upon thousands of tiny droplets, each one catching the light, transforming ordinary leaves and stems into jeweled things. Spider webs, invisible when dry, become suddenly apparent, strung between stems and outlined in silver beads of moisture. They're beautiful, intricate, perfect examples of patient engineering. This morning's first task is to check on the seedlings that were planted indoors several weeks ago. These are cabbage and lettuce seedlings, started early in the warming room of the kitchen. The warming room is a small space where the residual heat from the kitchen fires keeps the air mild even on the coldest days. It's an ideal spot for starting seeds early, giving them a head start before the outdoor soil is warm enough for direct sowing. Brother Thomas carefully carries the wooden trays outside, one at a time. Each tray is shallow, perhaps 3 inches deep, filled with a mixture of good garden soil and composted manure, sifted together to create a fine uniform medium. The trays are about 2 feet long and a foot wide, with drainage holes in the bottom to prevent waterlogging. He's made them himself from scrap wood, fitting the pieces together and securing them with wooden pegs rather than expensive iron nails. He places the trays in a sheltered spot near the southern wall, where they'll receive morning sun, but be protected from the coldest winds. The young plants need to become accustomed to outdoor conditions, gradually before they can be transplanted into the garden proper. This process, which some gardeners call hardening off, usually takes about a week, sometimes longer if the weather is particularly cold or windy. The first day, the trays spend perhaps 2 hours outside, then are carried back in. The second day, a bit longer, perhaps 3 or 4 hours. Each day they stay out a bit longer, spending more time in the outdoor conditions. By the end of the week they'll stay out all day and eventually all night, fully acclimated to outdoor life, ready to be transplanted into their permanent positions in the garden beds. He examines each seedling with a careful eye, looking for problems. Are the leaves a good green color, deep and healthy? Or are they yellowing, which might indicate nutrient deficiency or overwatering? Are they standing upright and firm, reaching toward the light? Or are they drooping, which might indicate underwatering or disease? Are there any signs of pest damage? Tiny holes in leaves or stems cut through? Any signs of disease, spots or lesions or wilting? The seedlings look healthy, vigorous. Their leaves are the fresh, almost translucent green of new growth, that particular shade that only young plants have. Each tiny plant has 2 seed leaves, the cotyledons that emerged first, and most are beginning to show the first true leaves emerging between them, the leaves that have the characteristic shape of their species. The cabbage seedlings are showing rounded leaves with slightly wavy edges. The lettuce seedlings are showing elongated leaves, already beginning to form the characteristic rosette shape. Brother Thomas feels a small sense of satisfaction, a quiet pleasure. Growing plants from seed is always somewhat uncertain. Seeds are tiny packages of potential, but they don't always realize that potential. Some seeds don't germinate at all, remaining hard and dormant in the soil. Some germinate but then quickly die, collapsing from fungal diseases encouraged by excessive moisture, a condition called damping off. But these look vigorous and healthy, and barring disaster, they should transplant well and grow into productive plants. Next, Brother Thomas begins his daily inspection walk, moving slowly along the garden paths, looking at everything. This daily inspection is one of the most important tasks of gardening, though it might not look like work to someone watching. He's not digging or planting or weeding, he's just walking, looking, occasionally stopping to examine something more closely. But this attention is crucial. A good gardener must notice small problems before they become large ones. A few aphids today can become an infestation in a week if left unchecked. A single weed going to seed can mean hundreds of weeds next year, thousands the year after that. He moves at a leisurely pace, without hurry. There's no rush. He stops frequently, bends to look closer at something that catches his eye, touches a leaf to test its texture, pinches a stem between his fingers to check its firmness. This walking meditation, this slow and careful attention to detail, is as much a part of gardening as the more active tasks of digging or planting. Perhaps it's the most important part. You can't fix problems you haven't noticed. The early spring crops are already in the ground, sown weeks ago when the soil first became workable after winter. Peas were sown in February, in a trench lined with dry bracken to insulate them from the worst cold. Now, in late March, tiny shoots are emerging, breaking through the soil surface, reaching toward the light. They're perhaps 2 inches tall, standing upright on stems as fine as thread, with their distinctive paired leaves. Each plant looks exactly like every other plant, identical, as if they're all copies of the same perfect template. In a few weeks, they'll need supports to climb on. Peas are vining plants, sending out tendrils that grasp anything nearby and pull themselves upward. Without support, they sprawl on the ground, where they're susceptible to rot and slug damage. With support, they grow upright, clean and healthy, easy to harvest. Brother Thomas makes a mental note to cut hazel ones soon for this purpose. The coppice beyond the monastery walls, where hazel trees are managed specifically for their ability to produce straight, flexible shoots, will provide what he needs. The onion sets, small bulbs planted in neat rows earlier in the month, are also showing green shoots. Each set is about the size of a marble, a tiny immature onion planted to grow larger. Now, slender green leaves are emerging from the tops of the bulbs, standing straight up from the soil like little green flames. The rows are neat and straight, each set spaced about 4 inches from the next, with about 10 inches between rows. By autumn, these will have grown into full-size onions, some as large as a man's fist. Onions are forgiving plants, not particularly fussy about much, adaptable to various conditions. But they do appreciate being kept free of weeds. Onions don't compete well with weeds. Their leaves are slender and upright, doing little to shade the soil around them, so weeds can easily establish themselves and steal water and nutrients that should go to the onions. A weedy onion bed will produce only small, disappointing bulbs. Brother Thomas crouches down and gently pulls a few young chickweed plants from between the onion rows. Chickweed is one of the first weeds to germinate in spring, quick to take advantage of any open soil, any spot where cultivated plants haven't yet established themselves. It grows in a sprawling mat, with small oval leaves and tiny white star-shaped flowers. It's not an aggressive weed, not difficult to remove, but it's persistent, always appearing, always needing to be controlled. The chickweed comes up easily, roots and all. The soil is moist from the dew and from rain a few days ago, and moist soil releases roots much more readily than dry soil. Dry soil clings to roots, tears them, leaves pieces behind that can regenerate. Moist soil lets go, allows you to extract the entire plant, root system and all. Brother Thomas drops the chickweed into his collecting basket, a wide, shallow basket woven from willow. Chickweed is good food for the monastery's few chickens, and it's also edible for humans, though most people don't realize this. The young leaves can be added to salads or cooked like spinach. They have a mild, slightly sweet taste. There are perennial vegetables already well established in the garden, plants that come back year after year without needing to be replanted. These are some of the most valuable plants in the garden because they require less work. You plant them once and they produce for years, sometimes decades. Sorrel, with its distinctive arrow-shaped leaves, is one of the first things to emerge in springs, often appearing even before the snow has fully melted. The leaves are already several inches long, growing in a clump, bright green and fresh. They have a sharp lemony taste, quite refreshing, pleasantly sour. A few sorrel leaves added to a soup or pottage give it a brightness, a freshness, cutting through the heavy, starchy quality that characterizes most winter foods. Sorrel helps wake up your taste buds after months of bland stored foods. Brother Thomas picks a handful now, selecting the younger, more tender leaves from the center of the plant. The older outer leaves can be used too, but they're tougher, more fibrous, and the sour taste becomes almost sharp, less pleasant. The young leaves are best. They'll go to Brother Martin, who manages the kitchen with the help of 2 lay brothers. Perhaps they'll appear in today's midday meal, chopped and stirred into the bean soup at the last minute, adding a fresh, bright note. The rhubarb crown is pushing up reddish shoots, thick and vigorous. Rhubarb is a curious plant, a perennial that dies back completely each winter and then re-emerges in spring with remarkable vigor. The shoots emerge from the soil, looking almost alien, fat and red and slightly furled, like something prehistoric. They grow with astonishing speed once they start. Today they're perhaps 3 inches tall. In a week, they might be 8 inches. In 2 weeks, a foot tall with leaves beginning to unfurl. The stalks are sour, far too sour to eat raw in any quantity, though Brother Thomas sometimes nibbles a tiny piece just to wake up his mouth. But stewed with honey, rhubarb makes a pleasing dish, both tart and sweet, with a unique flavor that's somehow both sharp and mellow. The monks believe rhubarb is good for the digestion, helping to move the bowels. And this seems to be true. The leaves themselves are poisonous, something every gardener knows, passed down through generations. Never eat the leaves, only the stalks. The leaves can make you quite ill. Asparagus, that curious and delicious plant, has spears emerging from the earth, breaking through the soil surface like fat green fingers reaching upward. They look almost alien, these thick shoots covered in scale-like leaves, purple-tinged green. They push up with remarkable speed once they start growing. Today, they're perhaps 3 inches tall. Tomorrow they might be 6 inches. The day after, 9 inches. Asparagus, once it decides to grow, grows fast. If left to grow, these spears would develop into tall, ferny plants, eventually reaching 5 or 6 feet in height, with delicate, feathery foliage and tiny flowers that would develop into bright red berries. But the young shoots are tender and delicious when cooked, so Brother Thomas will harvest most of them over the next few weeks, cutting them at ground level with a sharp knife when they're about 6 to 8 inches tall. The asparagus bed is one of his small prides, one of his successes. Asparagus is not an easy plant to establish. It takes patience. You plant crowns, clusters of fleshy roots with a central bud, and then you wait. The first year, you don't harvest at all. You let all the spears grow into ferns, building up the root system. The second year, you might harvest a few spears, just a few, but mostly you continue to let them grow. The third year, you can begin to harvest more seriously. It took 3 years from planting for these crowns to establish well enough to give a proper harvest, and Brother Thomas tended them patiently all that time, resisting the temptation to harvest too early, which would have weakened the plants, possibly even killed them. Brother Thomas moves to the compost heaps behind the storage shed. There are 3 heaps in various stages of decomposition, a system that ensures a continuous supply of finished compost. This is crucial. Compost is the garden's lifeblood, the source of its fertility, the way that waste becomes wealth and death becomes life. The oldest heap, The one that's been built and turned and tended for the past year is now dark, crumbly, and sweet-smelling. Well, sweet is perhaps not the right word. It smells of earth, of life, of rich, organic decay transformed into something beneficial. This compost is ready to be used, ready to be spread on the beds where it will feed the plants. He takes a handful and examines it closely, letting it run through his fingers. The texture is perfect, neither too wet nor too dry. If it's too wet, it clumps together in a solid mass. If it's too dry, it's dusty and light. This is just right, slightly moist, crumbly, breaking apart easily. Individual components are no longer distinguishable. What was once kitchen scraps and garden waste and stable bedding has become this uniform, dark material, friable and rich. You can't see the carrot peelings or the onion skins or the straw anymore. It's all become compost, transformed by time and by the countless organisms that live in the heap, breaking down complex materials into simpler ones. Brother Thomas fills his wooden wheelbarrow with the finished compost. The wheelbarrow is old, probably older than Brother Thomas himself. The wood is weathered grey, the wheel rim worn down from years of use, no longer perfectly round, but it's still sturdy, still functional. He fills it about halffull, perhaps 50 pounds of compost. More than that, and it becomes too heavy to push easily. And Brother Thomas has learned to be realistic about his capabilities. He's strong, but he's not young anymore. He pushes the wheelbarrow slowly along the path to the bed, where he plans to transplant the cabbage seedlings next week. The wheel creaks slightly with each revolution, a rhythmic sound that's somehow pleasant. The barrow wobbles a bit on the uneven path, but Brother Thomas has learned to anticipate its movements, to adjust his pushing to keep it balanced and moving forward. At the bed, he spreads the compost evenly, taking it in double handfuls and scattering it across the surface, trying to distribute it uniformly. He's aiming for a layer about an inch thick across the entire bed. When it's all spread, he uses his fingers to break up any clumps, working the compost lightly into the top few inches of soil, mixing it, but not burying it too deeply. This good compost will give the cabbages the nutrients they need to grow large and healthy. Cabbages are heavy feeders, plants that require rich soil, lots of nutrients. They're eating hungry plants, demanding plants. The compost provides nitrogen for leafy growth, phosphorus for root development, potassium for overall plant health and disease resistance, countless other minerals and nutrients in smaller amounts, the full spectrum of elements that plants need to thrive. The work continues steadily, rhythmically. Fill the wheelbarrow, push it to the bed, spread the compost, return for another load. It's not mentally challenging work. It's repetitive, almost meditative. Brother Thomas's mind wanders as he works, thinking about nothing in particular, or perhaps thinking about everything, thoughts drifting like clouds. By mid-morning, the bed is prepared, enriched, ready for planting. Brother Thomas steps back and looks at it with satisfaction. The dark compost on the brown soil, ready and waiting. Next week, when the cabbage seedlings are fully hardened off, he'll transplant them here, setting them carefully into the enriched earth, giving them the best possible start. After terce comes the main work period of the morning. The sun is well up now, having cleared the monastery walls completely. Its light falls directly into the garden. illuminating everything, creating sharply defined shadows. It's a pleasant warmth, especially in the spots sheltered from the breeze. Brother Thomas can feel it on his back, on his shoulders, penetrating through the rough wool of his habit. The breeze itself is soft from the south, carrying perhaps a hint of rain to come later in the day, but not immediately. Not for hours yet. Today, Brother Thomas has decided, is the right day to plant the bean seeds. The decision isn't arbitrary or impulsive. It's based on careful observation, accumulated knowledge, attention to signs. He's been watching the soil temperature, pressing his hand into the earth each morning, feeling how it warms. He's been watching the weather patterns, noting the direction of winds, the shape of clouds, the behavior of animals. He's been watching for the signs of spring's progress. The hawthorn bushes beyond the wall are beginning to leaf out, their branches showing tiny green points. The swallows have returned from wherever they winter, darting and swooping over the fields. These are the signs he watches, the accumulated wisdom passed down through generations of gardeners who learned to read the land and the sky. Beans are important to the monastery's diet, crucial really. Dried beans can be stored through the winter and made into filling soups and porridges, providing protein when fresh food is scarce, when the garden sleeps and gives nothing. Fresh beans in summer are a welcome addition to meals, tender and sweet when cooked simply, a luxury that makes the monks grateful. But it's the dried beans that matter most. The beans that mean survival. The beans that will feed them when snow covers the ground and frost locks the earth. Brother Thomas has saved seeds from last year's best plants. This is standard practice, ancient practice, the way farming has been done since humans first began to cultivate plants thousands of years ago. At harvest time last autumn, he marked several of the healthiest, most productive plants with bits of colored yarn tied to their stems. Red yarn from unraveled cloth, marking them as special. When those plants' beans matured fully, he left them on the plant much longer than the beans harvested for eating. Left them until the pods were completely dry and brown and rattling, the beans hard as stones inside. Then he harvested those specific pods, brought them to the storage shed, and spent an afternoon shelling them, sitting on a stool with a basket between his knees, breaking open the brittle pods and letting the beans fall into the basket. The sound was pleasant. The dry rattle of pods, the soft thunk of beans dropping. He sorted through them, discarding any that were damaged or discolored, or smaller than the rest, keeping only the best, the most perfect specimens. These he put into a small cloth bag, tied it securely with string, and hung it from a beam in the storage shed where mice can't reach it, where it would stay dry through the winter. He retrieves the bag now and unties the string, pours some of the beans into his palm. They're large mottled beans, whitish-purple in color, each one about the size of his thumbnail. Each one is smooth, hard, perfectly formed, beautiful in its simplicity. Each one represents potential, contains within itself the instructions to create a new plant that will produce hundreds more beans, that will feed the community, that will provide seeds for next year. It's almost miraculous when you think about it. This ability of plants to reproduce themselves, to make more from one. The bean bed has already been prepared weeks ago. It was dug over on one of the first warm days of early March, when the soil first became workable after winter's freeze. Brother Thomas turned the soil with his spade, breaking up the compacted surface and incorporating the manure that had been spread on top during autumn. Now, weeks later, the soil is ready, perfect, crumbly and rich, dark brown, almost black in the dampest spots, sweet smelling with that characteristic scent of good earth, of fertility, of life waiting to begin. Brother Thomas uses a hoe to create shallow furrows along the length of the bed, straight lines running from one end to the other. The hoe is an old one, its blade shaped by years of sharpening, taking on a curved profile from countless sessions with the whetstone. The handle is smooth, worn by countless ons over the years, comfortable to hold. Brother Thomas grips it lightly near the end, lets its weight do most of the work. He pulls it toward himself, drawing it through the soil, creating a straight line. The blade cuts through the soil easily, opening a small trench about 2 fingers deep. One furrow, then another parallel to it about 18 inches away. Then another. He makes 5 furrows total, running the full 10-foot length of the bed. The furrows need to be straight, not for any practical reason really, but because straight furrows are pleasing to look at, because there's satisfaction in orderly work, because disorder troubles the mind while order calms it. He plants the beans carefully, dropping one into the soil every handspan or so. He doesn't measure this precisely. He simply knows. 1 bean here. Take a step along the furrow. Another bean. Step, bean. Step, bean. Not too close together, or they'll compete for light and nutrients, crowding each other, resulting in smaller plants and smaller yields. Not too far apart, or space is wasted, productivity reduced. Experience has taught him the right spacing. His eye knows it, his hand knows it. This knowledge lives in his body, not his mind. After placing each bean, he gently covers it with soil, pulling the edges of the furrow over it with his fingers, making sure it's buried but not too deeply. The beans should be about 2 inches below the surface. Deeper than that, and they struggle to push through. Shallower, and they might dry out or be discovered by birds who will dig them up and eat them. He pats the soil down lightly over each bean. The beans must be in good contact with the soil to germinate properly. Air pockets around the seed can cause problems, delays, failures. As he works, he moves slowly along the row, bent at the waist, shuffling his feet, rather than walking and standing and bending repeatedly. This is easier on the back, a lesson learned through years of experience, through occasional days of back pain that taught him to modify his movements. It's easier to maintain a bent position for an extended period than to bend and straighten continuously. The back muscles don't like constant movement between positions. The work is meditative, repetitive, rhythmic. Drop a bean, cover it, pat the soil, move along. Drop a bean, cover it, pat the soil. His mind settles into the rhythm, becomes quiet, still. He thinks about very little, or perhaps he thinks about everything, but in a diffuse way. Thoughts drifting without urgency or direction. Perhaps he notices a bird calling from the orchard, a song thrush with its musical repetitive phrases, beautiful and complex. Perhaps he feels the warmth of the sun on his back, penetrating through the wool, soaking into his muscles, loosening them, easing the perpetual stiffness. Perhaps he simply exists in the moment, fully present in this simple task, this ancient task, performing work that humans have performed for thousands of years. Planting seeds, feeding themselves and their communities, participating in the great cycle of growth and harvest and storage and planting again. It takes Brother Thomas about an hour to plant all the beans, working his way methodically through all 5 furrows in the bed. His back is stiff when he finally straightens up. He presses his hands against his lower back, just above his hips, and arches slightly backward, feeling vertebrae pop and release. The sensation is satisfying, a small pleasure, a release of tension. It's good to stand upright again after so long bent over. He looks at the bed with satisfaction. The work is done. The bed looks neat, orderly. The soil is smooth, marked with 5 straight lines where the furrows have been filled in. Under that smooth surface, the beans wait, 50 or 60 of them, each one holding potential. In a week or so, if all goes well, they'll germinate. In 2 weeks, green shoots will appear above the soil. In 3 months, there will be plants waist-high, covered in white flowers, and then in pods. In 4 months, harvest. But all of that is far in the future. For now, there's just this quiet bed, this promise, this act of faith. When he's finished planting, he waters the bed gently, carefully. He uses a watering can with small holes in its spout, creating a gentle shower rather than a harsh stream. The can is made of copper, old and dented and green with verdigris, the blue-green patina that copper develops over time. It's been in the garden longer than Brother Thomas has, passed down from previous gardeners, a tool with history. He fills the can at the well, the water cold and shocking when some splashes on his hand. He carries it to the bean bed and tips it slowly, walking along beside the bed, distributing the water as evenly as he can. The water soaks into the soil quickly, disappearing, drinking itself into the thirsty earth. 1 full can, then another, then a third, until the soil is nicely moistened, but not waterlogged. Too much water and the seeds might rot before they germinate. Too little and they'll fail to start growing. The balance is important. Now the waiting begins. This is one of gardening's great lessons. One of its gifts, perhaps. Patience. You plant and then you wait. You can't hurry a seed. You can't force it. You can provide the right conditions, moisture, warmth, good soil, and then you must simply wait and trust the seed to do what it knows how to do. In a week or so, if the weather is favorable, if temperatures stay mild and rain comes but not too much, the beans will germinate. First, down in the darkness of the soil, where no one can see, a little white root will push out from the seed, pushing downward, seeking moisture and anchorage. Then a shoot will push upward, seeking light, pushing through the soil, finally breaking through the surface. The shoot will carry with it the split halves of the bean seed, which will look like 2 thick, pale leaves. These aren't true leaves, but cotyledons, seed leaves, storage organs. Later, the true leaves will emerge, the characteristic 3-part leaves of bean plants, dark green and slightly fuzzy to the touch. But all of that is still to come, still in the future, still hidden in possibility. For now, there's just the newly planted bed, the dark soil, the promise of growth hidden beneath the surface. It's enough. Brother Thomas moves on to other tasks. The herb garden needs attention. It always needs attention. Weeds are always trying to establish themselves among the herbs. And while some weeds have their uses, most are simply competition, taking water and nutrients and space that should go to the cultivated plants. He fetches his weeding cushion from the storage shed. A small flat cushion stuffed with wool, covered in a rough canvas fabric. It's worn and stained, the canvas faded and patched in places, but it provides enough padding to make kneeling bearable for extended periods. His knees are not as young as they once were, not as forgiving. He kneels beside the thyme bed and begins to handweed, working slowly and carefully. Thyme is a low-growing, spreading herb with tiny leaves and a pungent, aromatic smell. When Brother Thomas disturbs the plants, reaching in among them to pull weeds, that smell intensifies dramatically, filling the air around him. It's a clean smell, sharp and medicinal, almost piercing in its intensity. Some people find it too strong, but Brother Thomas loves it. It clears his head, seems to clear his lungs, makes breathing easier. The weeding is detailed, fiddly work. It requires focus and patience and a certain delicacy of movement. Large weeds can be pulled out relatively easily, grasped at the base and pulled steadily. But tiny seedlings, weeds just germinated, must be carefully extracted without disturbing the herbs around them, without tearing up the thyme plants along with the weeds. His fingers move through the plants carefully, discriminating, pulling this, but not that, guided by touch and smell and subtle visual cues. His fingers know the difference between a thyme shoot and a weed shoot without conscious thought. The texture is different. Thyme stems are woody, even when young, firm and slightly rough. Weed seedlings are soft, tender, watery. Thyme leaves are tiny, arranged in pairs along the stem. Weed seedlings have larger, softer leaves. Thyme smells intensely of itself when touched. Weeds smell greens, generic, planty, but without distinct character. He works his way slowly across the herb bed, section by section. Thyme gives way to sage, sage to rosemary, rosemary to oregano. Each herb has its own character, its own growth habit, its own scent. Rosemary is woody, almost shrub-like, with needle-like leaves that are dark green on top, silvery white underneath. When crushed, they release an intense piney smell. Sage has soft grey-green leaves covered in tiny hairs that give them a distinctive velvety texture. When you touch them, your fingers come away feeling slightly powdery, slightly fuzzy. The oregano is spreading enthusiastically this year, reaching beyond its allocated space. It's a vigorous plant, and it's beginning to encroach on the territory of a winter savory, a more delicate herb. Brother Thomas will need to cut it back soon to keep it from overwhelming its neighbors. But not today. Today is for weeding, for removing unwanted plants, not for cutting back wanted ones. Each task has its time. He finds a few small dock seedlings, their leaves distinctively elongated and slightly reddish, already showing the shape they'll have when mature. Dock has a deep taproot, thick and fleshy, and if left to grow, it becomes nearly impossible to remove. The taproot can extend 2 feet down or more, and it breaks easily, leaving pieces behind that regenerate into new plants. But at this stage, young and small, still tiny seedlings, dock comes up relatively easily if you're careful. Brother Thomas uses a narrow weeding fork to get underneath each seedling, levering it out gently, following the root down as far as he can, trying to get all of it. There are also a few speedwell seedlings scattered through the bed, small plants with tiny blue flowers and creeping stems. Speedwell is pretty, almost attractive enough to keep deliberately, but it's aggressive, and it spreads quickly, and it has no place in the herb garden where every plant should be purposeful, useful. Out it comes, roots and all. A butterfly visits the garden. appearing suddenly as butterflies do, materializing out of nowhere. It's a small white one, perhaps a green-veined white, delicate and seemingly fragile, though actually quite hardy. It flutters from flower to flower among the early blooming herbs. There aren't many flowers yet this early in spring, but the arabis near the wall is blooming, covered in small white flowers. There are a few early primroses, pale yellow and sweet-smelling. The butterfly investigates each one, landing briefly, tasting with its feet. Butterflies taste through their feet. Brother Thomas has heard, though he doesn't know if this is true. Then moving on to the next flower. Brother Thomas pauses in his work to watch it, resting his hands on his knees, simply observing. Butterflies are part of the garden's life, part of its beauty, part of its purpose. They pollinate the plants, carrying pollen from flower to flower, helping plants produce seeds. The garden is not just a food production system, not just vegetables in rows and herbs in beds. It's an entire small world, with creatures and plants all interconnected, in ways both visible and invisible, obvious and subtle. There are earthworms in the soil beneath his knees, he knows, countless earthworms turning over the earth constantly, creating channels that allow air and water to penetrate deep into the soil. There are beetles and spiders, hunting smaller insects, maintaining balance. There are bees that will arrive soon. Once more, flowers open, gathering nectar and pollen. Birds eating the insects, keeping their populations in check. Fungi in the soil, breaking down organic matter, making nutrients available to plants. Bacteria, countless bacteria, invisible but essential, the foundation of all soil fertility. All of these creatures, all of these processes, work together to create a healthy, productive garden. As midday approaches, the sun climbs higher and grows warmer. Brother Thomas feels the heat on his back and neck, feels sweat beginning to form, dampness spreading across his back beneath his habit. He straightens up, presses his hands to his lower back, and stretches, reaching his arms overhead, feeling his spine lengthen, his shoulders open. His joints pop softly, small releases of tension. He's not as flexible as he was at 20 or 30, but he's learned to work with his body's limitations rather than fighting them. He takes breaks when needed. He varies his tasks to avoid repetitive strain. He's learned what his body can and cannot do, learned to respect its boundaries. The bell rings for sext, the midday prayer, its sound carrying clearly across the garden. Brother Thomas rises from his knees slowly, the movement taking effort. His knees protesting slightly. He brushes the soil from his hands and habit. Though this doesn't really clean them, the soil is ingrained part of him. He makes his way back to the chapel. The garden will wait. The weeds will still be there after prayers, and after the midday meal, and tomorrow. Weeds are patient. Weeds are persistent. Weeding is never finished, never complete. It's a continuous process, like prayer itself, perhaps, something that must be returned to again and again. After the midday meal and the rest period that follows, after none, the mid-afternoon prayer service, Brother Thomas returns to the garden. The afternoon light is different from morning light, warmer in tone, more golden. The angle is different, coming from the west now rather than the east. And this changes everything. Shadows fall in new directions. revealing textures and shapes that morning light obscured. Colors shift. The greens seem richer, deeper, more saturated. The browns of the soil show their reddish undertones, warm and alive. This afternoon's main task is to tend to the fruit trees. Spring is the proper time for major pruning work. The time to remove dead or damaged wood, to shape the trees, to encourage good growth and good harvests. There's an art to pruning, a skill that takes years to develop. Brother Thomas has spent those years learning, observing the results of different cuts, seeing how trees respond to various interventions, developing an eye for what needs to be done. He approaches the oldest apple tree first, the gnarled one in the corner of the orchard area. It's a twisted, knobby thing, its trunk thick and furrowed, its bark rough as can be. The tree has stood here for 30 years or more, perhaps 40. It was here before Brother Thomas came to the monastery, say. Was here before Brother Anselm tended the garden. Who planted it? Someone now dead and forgotten. But the tree remains, still productive, still giving fruit. Despite its age and somewhat ungainly appearance, twisted and weather-beaten, it's still productive, still valuable. It gives good apples each autumn, medium-sized fruit with red-streaked yellow skin and crisp, sweet flesh that's perfect for eating fresh. The texture is firm but not hard, yielding pleasantly to the bite. The flavor is perfectly balanced between sweet and tart. Not cloying, not too sharp. These are among the best apples in the garden, and they store well through winter, often lasting until March or April if kept properly cool and dry in the cellar. Brother Thomas walks around the tree slowly, in no hurry, looking at it from all angles, considering what needs to be done. He circles it completely, twice, examining it carefully. Which branches are healthy, showing good vigor? Which are crossing and rubbing against each other? Which are diseased or damaged? Which are growing in unproductive directions, toward the center of the tree or straight downward, where they'll never produce fruit? Pruning requires understanding the tree, seeing not just what it is, but what it could be, what it should be. Each cut changes the tree's shape, redirects its energy, influences where it will put growth in the coming season. Cut too much and you weaken the tree. Cut too little and it becomes congested, crowded, prone to disease. The goal is balance, opening the canopy to light and air while maintaining the tree's productive capacity. There's a dead branch, broken off about halfway along its length, probably by wind or snow load during winter. The broken end is grey and splintered, showing no green cambium beneath the bark. The wood is clearly dead, dry, lifeless. This needs to come off, cut back to healthy wood, to living tissue. Otherwise, disease can enter through the wound and spread into the rest of the tree, decay creeping inward, weakening the branch, eventually reaching the trunk. Brother Thomas fetches a saw from the storage shed. It's a simple tool, a bow saw with a metal blade stretched in a wooden frame. The blade is about 18 inches long, slightly curved to match the natural arc of the sawing motion. The teeth are sharpened on both edges, so the saw cuts on both the push and pull strokes, making the work more efficient. The blade has been sharpened regularly, and it cuts through wood cleanly and efficiently, each tooth biting into the wood, removing a tiny curl of sawdust. He positions himself carefully, considering the angle of his cut, thinking about which way the branch will fall when it comes free. He wants to cut just outside the branch collar, that slight swelling where the branch meets the trunk. Cutting here allows the tree to heal properly, to close the wound with new growth. He begins to saw, the blade biting into the wood with a rhythmic rasping sound. Back and forth, a steady rhythm. Each stroke removes a tiny amount of wood, sawdust falling, catching in the bark below, dusting his sandals and the ground. The work requires steady pressure, but not excessive force. This is something Brother Thomas learned early. You don't force a saw. You let the saw do the work. Maintain the rhythm. Let the tool perform as it was designed to perform. Forcing it just makes you tired without cutting any faster, and it can bind the blade or damage the teeth. The branch is about 3 inches in diameter, thick enough to require real effort. Brother Thomas settles into the work, maintaining his rhythm, not rushing. His breathing synchronizes with the sawing motion. Breathe in on the pull stroke, breathe out on the push. The saw moves back and forth. The cut deepens gradually, millimeter by millimeter. When he's nearly through the branch, when perhaps only an inch of wood remains uncut, he pauses and supports the branch's weight with one hand. This prevents the branch from tearing away from the tree at the last moment, damaging the bark and creating a ragged wound. The last few strokes are careful, controlled. The last fibers of wood part with a small cracking sound, and the branch comes away clean, dropping into his supporting hand. Brother Thomas examines the cut surface. It's smooth, angled slightly to allow water to run off rather than pooling. A good cut, clean and precise. He'll leave it as is. Some gardeners apply tar or paint to large pruning cuts, sealing them supposedly to prevent infection. But Brother Thomas, following Brother Anselm's teaching, has found that trees heal better if left alone. The tree will form its own protective callus over the wound, a natural barrier of new tissue that seals out disease. He moves on to other minor pruning tasks. There are several small shoots growing straight up from the main branches, vertical growths that look vigorous but are actually problematic. These are water sprouts, so called because they grow vigorously but rarely produce fruit. They emerge from dormant buds on older wood, usually in response to heavy pruning or injury. The tree is trying to replace lost canopy quickly, but it does so at the expense of fruiting wood. Water sprouts use energy that should go into fruit production. They need to be removed while they're young and small. Brother Thomas cuts them away with his knife, a sharp folding blade that he keeps in a leather pouch at his belt. He makes clean cuts close to the branch, but not flush with it. A slight collar should remain, about 1/4 inch, perhaps a bit less. This collar contains cells that will help the wound heal, producing callus tissue that will eventually cover the cut completely. His knife is a simple one. No fancy ornamentation. Just a good blade and a wooden handle. But the blade is kept sharp, honed regularly on a whetstone with oil. A sharp blade makes clean cuts that heal well. A dull blade tears and crushes plant tissue, making wounds that are slow to heal and prone to infection. Brother Thomas tests the blade's sharpness by carefully shaving a bit of hair from his forearm. If it cuts easily, it's sharp enough. If not, it needs more honing. There are also several branches growing into the center of the tree, crossing other branches. This is problematic. Trees need good air circulation through their canopy. especially in England's damp climate, where fungal diseases thrive in still, humid air. Branches that cross and rub against each other create wounds where the bark wears away. These wounds are entry points for disease, gates that let infection in. Brother Thomas selectively removes some of these crossing branches, stepping back frequently to look at the overall shape of the tree, to see the big picture. He's trying to create an open, vase-like structure, a shape that allows light to penetrate to the center of the tree and air to flow through freely. This reduces disease problems and allows fruit on interior branches to ripen properly, receiving enough sunlight to develop good color and flavor. Pruning is partly science, partly art. Perhaps mostly art. There are principles to follow, certainly. Remove dead and diseased wood, thin out crowded areas, maintain the tree's natural form. But within those principles, there's tremendous room for judgment, for aesthetic sense, for vision. Two gardeners might prune the same tree differently, both achieving good results, but with slightly different visions of what the tree should become. There's no single correct answer, just better and worse choices. After about an hour, the apple tree looks better. Not dramatically different, not transformed, but improved. The tree seems more open, more balanced. The structure is clearer, easier to read. When it leaves out fully in a few weeks, covering itself in green, the light will penetrate better to the interior branches, and air will move through it more freely. The tree will put its energy into fruit production rather than excessive leafy growth in crowded areas. Brother Thomas gathers up all the pruned branches and twigs, collecting them into several piles. Some of this wood is large enough to be useful for firewood. The larger pieces, anything thicker than a man's thumb, will go to the monastery's woodpile. It's apple wood, which burns with a pleasant sweet scent and moderate heat. Not as hot as oak, but hotter than pine. Good wood for cooking fires. The smaller twigs and leaves will go onto the compost heap, adding to the slowly accumulating mass of organic matter that will eventually become next year's compost. Nothing is wasted in the garden, nothing thrown away. Everything cycles through, everything returns. What seems like waste is actually wealth in the waiting, future fertility. He makes a pile of the larger branches near the storage shed. Later, perhaps in a few days when he has time, perhaps tomorrow if the weather is poor and prevents outdoor work, he'll cut these into more manageable lengths with a hatchet. They'll need to season for several months before they're dry enough to burn well. Green wood smokes and sputters, wasting energy. Dry wood burns clean and hot. The afternoon is drawing on toward evening. The light is becoming more golden, softer, less harsh than midday sun. The quality of light in late afternoon is beautiful, warm and gentle, making everything look its best. The sun is lower in the sky now, approaching the western wall, and the shadows are growing longer, stretching across the garden like reaching fingers. Brother Thomas decides to spend the remaining time before Vespers, the evening prayer service, quiet observation and planning. This is different from active work, but it's work nonetheless, important work. A good gardener must observe, must notice small changes, must anticipate what will need to be done in the days and weeks ahead. The garden is always changing, always in motion, and the gardener must stay attentive, responsive. He walks slowly through the garden, his hands clasped behind his back in his sleeves, looking at everything with fresh eyes. The pea shoots are growing well, putting on height each day. They're about 6 inches tall now, and their tendrils are beginning to form, little curling appendages that wave slowly in the breeze, seeking something to grasp. In another week, perhaps less, they'll need their supports. He should gather those hazel ones very soon, perhaps tomorrow if the weather holds. The soil in one bed looks a bit dry, the surface dusty, showing tiny cracks. Tomorrow morning, that bed will need watering, a thorough soaking. It's a bed of recently emerged lettuce seedlings, rows of tiny plants with their first true leaves just appearing. And lettuce needs consistent moisture, especially when young. Let it dry out and the leaves become bitter. The plant's stunted. There's a patch of ground elder trying to establish itself near the wall. Its distinctive leaves just beginning to show. Compound leaves with sharply toothed edges. Ground elder is a pernicious weed, one of the worst, with deep roots and spreading rhizomes that creep underground, sending up new shoots at intervals. If you try to dig it out and miss even a small piece of rhizome, that piece will regenerate into a new plant. It must be dealt with thoroughly, completely, or it will spread and become nearly impossible to eradicate. Brother Thomas makes a mental note to deal with it tomorrow, to devote serious time to its removal. He'll need to get a fork deep under the patch and lift out every bit of root he can find, following the rhizomes in all directions, excavating carefully. Even then, he'll probably miss some pieces, and he'll need to watch this spot carefully, pulling any new shoots that appear immediately, weakening the plant gradually by denying it the ability to photosynthesize. The early radishes are forming small bulbs, visible now at the soil surface, red, pink, and white, swelling nicely. In another week or so, perhaps 10 days, they'll be ready to harvest. Radishes grow quickly, astonishingly quickly, often ready just 4 weeks after sowing. They're one of the first vegetables to be harvested each spring, and they're welcomed enthusiastically after a winter of stored foods. Their sharp, peppery flavor wakes up the palate, adds excitement to meals that have become monotonous. The garden is never static, never the same from one day to the next. Every day brings small changes, incremental shifts. Seeds germinate, plants grow, adding leaves, gaining height. Buds swell. Weeds appear where there were none yesterday. Insects emerge, beginning their own life cycles. Birds build nests, lay eggs. The gardener must be attentive to all of it, responsive to what the garden needs, day by day, season by season, year by year. Brother Thomas notices a blackbird on one of the low branches of a pear tree, perfectly still, watching him with one bright eye. The bird's feathers are black with an iridescent sheen, purplish in certain lights. Its beak is yellow-orange, bright against the dark plumage. Blackbirds are common in the garden, present year-round, though they're more vocal and visible in spring and summer. They hunt for worms and insects, turning over leaves with their beaks, probing the soil, cocking their heads to listen. Mostly they're beneficial, eating many pests, keeping populations in check. Sometimes they damage soft fruit, particularly strawberries and raspberries, pecking holes in ripe berries. But the benefit outweighs the harm, and Brother Thomas welcomes them. The bell rings for vespers, its sound carrying clearly across the garden, a single bell rung in a steady rhythm. Brother Thomas makes his way to the chapel once more, leaving his tools in the storage shed, brushing dirt from his hands. The afternoon's work is done. After Vespers comes the evening meal, simple and sparse as all their meals are. And after that, Compline, the last service of the day, prayers in the darkening chapel, voices blending in ancient words, then silence and sleep. Tomorrow, the garden will be waiting, as it always is. There will be more to do, as there always is. The work is never finished, never complete. But this doesn't feel burdensome to Brother Thomas. It feels right. It feels like his place in the world, his purpose. Each day, he tends the garden. Each day, the garden feeds the community. It's a partnership, a covenant, a sacred exchange. The garden gives, and he gives in return. Both flourish. As spring progresses into summer, the character of the garden changes dramatically, almost miraculously. The tender, pale greens of new growth deepen to darker, more substantial shades, to the deep, rich green that speaks of maturity and health. Everything that was small becomes large. What were seedlings, delicate things barely larger than your thumb, are now substantial plants, bushy and vigorous, taking up space, filling their allocated beds completely, sometimes even spilling over the edges. The transition happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, day to day. If you're in the garden every day, you might not notice the changes. But looking back over a few weeks, comparing today to a month ago, the change is remarkable, even astonishing. The garden has gone from earth and promise to abundance and productivity, from potential to reality. By June, early summer, the peas are in full production. Every few days now, Brother Thomas harvests them, moving along the rows with a large wicker basket over his arm, picking at the swollen pods. The pea plants grow on the hazel supports he put in place back in April. 8-foot wands driven into the ground at intervals and crisscrossed to create a rough lattice. The peas have climbed enthusiastically, their tendrils curling around the wands, pulling themselves upward toward the light, seeking height, reaching for the sun. Some plants have climbed to 5 feet or more. The pods hang among the leaves, green and plump, some ready to harvest, others still immature. Brother Thomas has learned to judge by touch which ones are ready, which have reached that perfect moment. He runs his thumb along the length of a pod, feeling the peas inside through the pod wall. If they're rounded and distinct, pressing against the pod, firm but not hard, they're ready. If the pod is still flat, or the peas inside are tiny, barely noticeable bumps, they need a few more days. The timing is important. Too soon. And the peas inside are tiny and underdeveloped, barely worth the effort of shelling, hardly providing any food. Too late, and they become tough and starchy, losing their sweetness, becoming mealy and unpleasant. There's a window, perhaps a week, when each variety is at its peak, and Brother Thomas tries to harvest within that window, checking the plants every few days. Perfectly ripe peas are sweet and tender, delicate, almost melting on the tongue when cooked. The flavor is subtle but distinctive, faintly sweet, grassy, fresh. Some of the peas are eaten fresh, prepared simply by Brother Martin, boiled briefly with just a touch of salt, and perhaps a bit of butter if they have it. Fresh peas are a great treat, a luxury really. The monks look forward to fresh peas all winter, and when they finally appear in June, they're greeted with genuine appreciation, with real pleasure. For a few weeks, they eat peas with almost every meal. But most peas must be dried for winter storage. Fresh peas are wonderful, but they last only days. Dried peas are survival. The monks spread them out on wooden trays in the sun. Large, shallow trays made specifically for this purpose, and leave them there for a week or two, depending on the weather. The trays are placed in a spot that's sheltered from rain, but fully open to sun and air circulation. Each day, someone, usually one of the younger monks assigned to help Brother Thomas, stirs the peas to ensure even drying, moving the ones on the bottom to the top, spreading them around. As they dry, they change from bright green to a duller olive color. Their skins wrinkle slightly. Their texture firms up, becoming hard. Eventually, they become as hard as little stones, clicking together when you run your hand through them. Properly dried peas will keep for months, even years if stored in a cool, dry place, safe from mice and insects. Throughout the winter, they'll be made into filling soups and porridges, soaked overnight to soften them, then simmered for hours until they break down into a thick, creamy consistency. They provide protein and calories when fresh food is scarce, when the garden gives nothing, when survival depends on what was stored. The beans are also growing well by midsummer, thriving in the warm weather. The plants are now waist-high, bushy and vigorous, covered in leaves. Each plant has multiple stems rising from its base, sometimes 4 or 5 stems, all bearing leaves and flowers. The leaves are the characteristic 3-part shape, like 3 rounded leaflets joined together, dark green and slightly fuzzy, with a texture that's somehow both rough and soft at once. If you rub a leaf, you can feel the tiny hairs. Small white flowers appear among the leaves in late June. They're simple flowers, unpretentious, with 5 petals arranged in the shape that gives the bean family its name. Fabaceae, the butterfly family. The flowers look like tiny white butterflies perched among the leaves. They're self-pollinating, meaning they don't need bees or other insects to transfer pollen, though bees visit them anyway, drawn by whatever subtle nectar or scent they produce. Soon after the flowers, as the first tender bean pods appear, hanging downward from the plants. They start as tiny things, barely an inch long, slender and pointed. But they grow quickly, swelling, lengthening. Within a week, they're 3 inches long. Within 2 weeks, 4 or 5 inches. Brother Thomas harvests these young pods whole when they're still small and tender, before the beans inside have fully developed. They're delicious at this stage, cooked whole, steamed or boiled briefly until just tender, still crisp but no longer raw. Perhaps tossed with a bit of butter and chopped herbs, or served plain, needing nothing. Later in the season, he'll let some pods mature fully, allowing the beans inside to grow large and the pods themselves to turn from green to yellow to brown. These mature beans will be dried, like the peas, for winter use. They'll keep all winter and into spring, providing protein when there's little else. The dried beans from these plants are what he saved for this year's seed, and what next year's seed will come from. An unbroken chain of beans stretching back through time, each year's crop producing the next year's seed. The cabbages, transplanted in April as small seedlings, have grown into impressive plants, substantial heads of tightly packed leaves. The outer leaves are large, spreading blue-green in color with prominent white veins. The heads themselves, formed from inner leaves wrapped tightly around each other, are dense and heavy as stones. Brother Thomas lifts one experimentally, feeling its weight, perhaps 4 or 5 pounds. In another few weeks, they'll be even larger. He watches them carefully for caterpillars, the pale green larvae of white butterflies. These caterpillars are voracious, eating constantly, and they can devastate a cabbage patch in a matter of days if left unchecked. They chew holes in the leaves, sometimes eating the outer leaves down to the thick veins, sometimes boring into the hearts of the cabbages themselves. Brother Thomas checks the plants every few days, lifting leaves to look underneath where the caterpillars hide during the day. When he finds them, he picks them off by hand, dropping them into a bucket of water where they drown. It's tedious work, repetitive, but necessary. Prevention is easier than cure. The onions and leeks are thickening nicely, their green stalks standing in neat rows. By now, in mid-June, the onion bulbs are well formed, visible at the soil surface, swelling steadily. Brother Thomas keeps them carefully weeded. Onions and leeks don't compete well with weeds. Their leaves are narrow and upright, doing little to shade the soil around them so weeds can easily establish themselves and steal water and nutrients. A weedy onion bed will produce only small, disappointing bulbs, hardly worth the space they occupy. In the herb garden, everything is lush and aromatic, the herbs at their peak now. The mint has spread despite Brother Thomas's efforts to contain it, sending runners through the soil, popping up in unexpected places. He cuts it back regularly, sometimes weekly, and even digs out entire sections when it spreads too far. Despite his vigilance, the mint persists, which is fine, really. It's useful mint after all, good for so many things. Better to have too much than too little. The lavender is beginning to flower now, and it's beautiful. Spikes of purple-blue flowers rise above the grey-green foliage. Hundreds of tiny flowers clustered on each spike. The scent is intense, heady, almost overwhelming when you're close to it. It fills the entire herb garden, drifts on the breeze, reaches even to the orchard. Bees love the lavender above all else. And on warm afternoons, the air around it hums constantly with their activity. Dozens of bees working the flowers, gathering nectar and pollen, their legs dusty with yellow pollen. Brother Thomas finds this sound soothing, deeply peaceful. It's a sound of life, of productivity, of nature doing what it does. The bees and the flowers have an arrangement, a partnership. The flowers provide food, and the bees provide pollination. Both benefit, both flourish. It's beautiful in its simplicity. He harvests some of the lavender in full flower, cutting the stems with a small knife, selecting the best spikes, those with the most flowers, open. He cuts them with long stems, about 12 inches of stem attached to each flower spike. He gathers them into small bundles, perhaps 20 stems per bundle, and ties them with string. These bundles will be hung upside down in the storage shed where air can circulate around them, drying slowly over the next few weeks. Once dried, the lavender will be stored in cloth bags and used throughout the year. Some will be hung in the monastery's linen closets, where it will perfume the sheets and help deter moths. Some will be used in the infirmary, where its scent is believed to calm the sick and promote healing. Some will be added to bath water on special occasions, creating fragrant, relaxing baths. The summer brings longer days, and Brother Thomas spends more time in the garden. There's simply more to do. Everything is growing vigorously, which means more watering, more weeding, more harvesting, more tending. The days are longer, so there's more time for work, but there's also more work to fill that time. The watering, especially, becomes a constant task, an ongoing need. Rain comes sometimes. Blessed rain that saves him hours of work. Rain that waters more thoroughly than he ever could. Rain that soaks deep into the soil, reaching roots far below the surface. But when the weather is dry, which it often is in June and July, Brother Thomas must water regularly, almost daily for some plants. He's developed an efficient system over the years, learning from experience, adapting, improving. Early in the morning, before the sun is high and hot, he fills several large barrels near the well. Wooden barrels that can hold 30 or 40 gallons each. The water warms slightly during the day, sitting in the sun. And this warmed water is better for the plants than shocking them with cold well water straight from the depths. Plants prefer water that's close to air temperature. Then, in the evening, after Vespers, when the worst heat of the day has passed, he uses this warmed water to water the beds that need it most. He doesn't water everything every day. Experience has taught him which plants are more drought-tolerant and which need frequent watering. The lettuce, for instance, needs regular moisture, or it becomes bitter and tough, sometimes even bolts, sending up a flower stalk and going to seed prematurely. The beans can tolerate a bit more dryness, though they produce better, more tender pods, with consistent watering. The herbs, many of which come originally from Mediterranean climates, actually prefer somewhat drier conditions once established, too much water, and they become leggy, their flavors diluted. The evening watering is peaceful work, perhaps Brother Thomas's favorite task. The day's heat is fading, the air cooling, becoming more comfortable. The low sun casts long shadows across the garden, shadows that stretch and lengthen as he works. Birds are singing their evening songs, blackbirds especially, their musical whistling carrying across the garden. Everything feels softer, gentler, more peaceful than during the day. Brother Thomas moves through the garden methodically with bucket and watering can, giving each plant what it needs. The water soaks into the dry soil with a soft, satisfying sound. A quiet gurgling and sighing as the earth drinks. You can almost hear the plants responding, relaxing, opening their pores, beginning the process of moving water up from roots to leaves. Summer evenings in the garden often linger past Compline. After the final prayers of the day, after the other monks have made their way to the dormitory for sleep, Brother Thomas sometimes returns to the garden for a few quiet minutes. He's not supposed to, technically. After Compline, the monastery observes the great silence, and monks should be in the dormitory. But the abbot knows Brother Thomas sometimes visits the garden, and he doesn't object. Some rules can be gently bent for good reason. Brother Thomas sits on the bench by the well, his back against the warm stone wall, and simply exists in the space. He doesn't think about tasks or plans. He doesn't pray, not formally. He just sits, present, aware, peaceful. The sky fades from blue to deeper blue to purple. Stars begin to appear, first one, then several, then countless thousands, more than you can count, spreading across the sky in brilliant profusion. The air cools gradually. Night blooming flowers, evening primrose, and night-scented stock release their subtle scents, perfuming the darkening garden. An owl calls from somewhere beyond the wells, its wavering hoot carrying across the fields. Bats emerge, flickering shapes against the twilight sky, hunting for insects with impossible precision. This is Brother Thomas's favorite time, these stolen moments of stillness. He doesn't pray, not with words, but perhaps this is prayer of a kind, this quiet attention, this sense of being part of something larger than himself, this gratitude for the earth and its generosity, this recognition of beauty. Eventually, he rises, brushes off his habit, and makes his way to the dormitory. Tomorrow the cycle begins again. Matins in the dark before dawn. Lords as light returns. The return to the garden as the sun climbs. Another day of work, of tending, of care. It's enough. It's always been enough. August brings the peak of the harvest season, the time when the garden gives most abundantly. The monastery is busier than at any other time of year. Brother Thomas works from dawn until dark, and even then, there's more to do. The garden is bursting with abundance, producing more than the small community can eat fresh, which is exactly the point. Much of what's harvested now must be preserved for winter, transformed from fresh food into stored food, from abundance into security. The onions and leeks are ready to be pulled, finally mature after months of growth. Brother Thomas chooses a dry day for this task. Pulling onions in wet weather invites rot, and rot can spread through stored onions quickly, destroying weeks of work in a matter of days. The weather has been dry for several days now, and the forecast, such as it is, based on wind direction and cloud patterns and the behavior of animals, suggests it will remain dry for a few more days. Perfect. He uses a digging fork to gently loosen the soil around each plant, careful not to damage the bulbs. The fork slides into the soil easily, the soil loose and crumbly after months of cultivation. He works it back and forth gently, breaking up the soil, loosening its grip on the roots. Then he grasps each plant by its leafy top and pulls steadily. The bulb resists for a moment, then releases, coming free from the soil with a soft sound. The bulbs are large and white, some as big as a man's fist, beautiful in their simplicity. He shakes the excess soil from the roots and places each onion on the ground. Later, he'll cut away the leafy tops, leaving about an inch of stem attached. The tops will go to the compost heap or to the chickens if they're still tender enough. Nothing is wasted. The onions are laid out on wooden slats in the sun to dry, an important process. Drying takes about a week, sometimes 10 days if the humidity is high. The outer skins need to turn papery and brown, and the neck where the leaves attach needs to dry completely and seal closed. If they're stored before they're properly dry, they'll rot. Brother Thomas checks them daily, turning them occasionally to ensure even drying, examining each one for signs of damage or disease. Any onion that shows soft spots or signs of rot is set aside to be used immediately in the kitchen. You can't store damaged onions. They'll rot and spread that rot to their neighbors. Once fully dry, the onions can be plaited together by their stalks, woven into long braids that are hung in the cool, dry cellar where they'll keep for months. Well-stored onions often last until March or April, sometimes even into May if the winter is cold enough and the cellar stays properly cool and dry. They're essential to winter cooking, adding flavor to otherwise bland soups and stews, providing the foundation for countless meals. The garlic, planted last autumn, is also ready now. Brother Thomas can tell by the leaves, which are beginning to yellow and die back. When about half the leaves have yellowed, it's time to harvest. He digs carefully around each cluster of bulbs, afraid of damaging them with the fork's tines. Garlic is precious, worth more than onions, pound for pound, and every bulb matters. The garlic comes up in clusters, each planted clove having divided into a whole bulb of 6 or 8 or 10 cloves. The bulbs are beautiful, tight and firm, wrapped in papery white or purplish skins. The smell is intense, sharp and pungent. The characteristic garlic smell that makes your eyes water slightly if you're too close. Garlic is precious in the monastery kitchen. It flavors soups and stews, transforms simple food into something more interesting. It's also believed to have medicinal properties, good for preventing sickness, good for the heart and blood, good for general health. Whether these beliefs are true, Brother Thomas doesn't know, but he knows garlic makes food taste better, and that's valuable enough. The cabbages are cut when they're firm and heavy, the heads dense and solid. Brother Thomas uses a sharp knife to cut each head from its stalk, cutting at ground level, leaving the outer leaves in place to protect the cabbage. The heads are large, some weighing 8 or 10 pounds, so heavy they're awkward to carry. He loads them into a wheelbarrow and transports them to the root cellar beneath the refectory. The root cellar is cool and dark, perfect for storage. The temperature stays relatively constant year-round, cool in summer, not freezing in winter. These cabbages will be stored here, where they'll keep fresh for several weeks, possibly months if conditions are right. Some will also be fermented to make sauerkraut, a process that extends their storage life through the winter. Fermented cabbage will keep until spring, providing fresh vegetables when the garden gives nothing. The root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, turnips, beets, are left in the ground for now. They can be harvested as needed through the autumn. Root vegetables actually improve in flavor after the first frost, something every gardener knows. The cold triggers the plants to convert some of their starches to sugars, a natural antifreeze response. This makes the roots sweeter, more palatable, less earthy in flavor. But there are no potatoes to harvest. Because this is 1347, and potatoes won't arrive in Europe from South America for another 200 years. Brother Thomas doesn't know about potatoes, doesn't know what he's missing. The food plants available to him are those that have been cultivated in Europe for centuries. Turnips and parsnips instead of potatoes, providing the starchy staples the community depends on. Instead of potatoes, the monastery relies heavily on turnips and parsnips, and these are being grown in abundance now, filling several large beds. They're crucial for winter survival, along with dried beans and peas and stored onions and cabbages. Without these staples, the community would go hungry in winter. The fruit trees are laden now, branches bending under the weight of developing fruit. The apples are ripening in stages, different varieties maturing at different times, providing a succession of fruit from late summer through autumn. The earliest apples, small and rather tart, are ready now in late July and early August. These don't store well, so they're eaten fresh or cooked immediately. Brother Martin makes apple porridge, a dish the monks love, combining oats and apples with cinnamon and just a touch of honey. The smell fills the refectory as it cooks, sweet and spicy and comforting. Or he makes applesauce, cooking the apples down with honey until they break into a fluffy consistency, perfect for serving alongside the occasional meat dishes they eat on feast days. Later varieties of apples, firmer and less perishable, will ripen through August and into September. These are the storing apples, the varieties that will last through winter. Brother Thomas will harvest them carefully, avoiding any bruising. Each apple will be wrapped individually in dry straw or in scraps of cloth and packed carefully into wooden crates. Stored in the cool cellar, properly tended and checked regularly for any signs of rot. Good apples can last until March or April, sometimes even into May. The pears are more delicate, more demanding. They ripen quickly and must be eaten soon after harvest. There's a brief window, just a few days for each variety, when they're perfect. Sweet, juicy, with that characteristic grainy texture that makes pears distinctive. Before that window, they were hard and flavorless, unpleasant to eat. After it, they become mushy and begin to rot, browning from the inside out. Brother Thomas checks the pears daily now, pressing each one gently with his thumb, testing its firmness, watching for the subtle color change that indicates ripeness. When they're ready, when that perfect moment arrives, he harvests them all at once. And then, for several glorious days, everyone in the monastery eats pears with every meal. Pears at breakfast, pears at dinner, fresh pears, cooked pears, pears in every form. It's a brief period of abundance, a gift from the trees, and it's appreciated deeply. The plum tree gives a modest crop this year, not as abundant as some years, but respectable. The plums are small, dark purple, almost black, hanging in clusters. They are very tart, too sour to eat raw in any quantity, but Brother Martin transforms them into conserve, cooking them slowly with honey and spices until they break down into a thick, sweet tart spread. This conserve, stored in pottery jars sealed with beeswax, will last through winter. It's saved for feast days, spread on bread as a special treat, a taste of summer in the depths of winter. Herbs are harvested intensively now, large quantities cut and dried for winter use. Late summer is the ideal time for this. The plants are mature, full of essential oils, at their most potent. Brother Thomas cuts them in the morning, after the dew has dried, but before the day's heat has diminished their oils. Morning cut herbs are always best. Each herb is bundled and tied with string, perhaps 20 stems per bundle, then hung upside down in the storage shed where air can circulate freely around them. The shed becomes a forest of hanging herbs, each bundle slowly drying, concentrating its flavors and medicinal property. The transformation takes a week or two. Fresh green herbs gradually turn to dried herbs, their colors fading slightly, their textures becoming brittle. The scent in the shed is almost overwhelming during this time. Mint, thyme, oregano, sage, lavender, all mingling together. It's a concentrated essence of the herb garden, intense and complex. Brother Thomas finds it pleasant in small doses, but he's careful not to spend too long in the enclosed serene space. The concentrated herb oils can be overwhelming, can make you dizzy or give you a headache if you breathe them too long. September brings the harvest of the beans and peas that were left to mature for drying. These pods were never picked for fresh eating. They stayed on the plants all summer, slowly developing, their seeds swelling and maturing, the pods themselves turning from green to yellow to brown. Now the pods are completely dry, rattling when shaken, the beans and peas hard as stones inside. Brother Thomas picks the pods and spreads them out in a sunny, dry spot. Later, he'll shell them, removing the dried beans and peas from their pods. This shelling is often done by several monks together in the evening, sitting in the cloister, talking quietly while their hands work. A communal activity that makes the task more pleasant. The work is simple, repetitive, almost meditative. Break open a pod. Let the beans or peas fall into a basket. Discard the pod onto the compost pile. Again and again, basket after basket. Your fingers become practiced, efficient, working automatically while your mind wanders or engages in conversation. The shelled beans and peas are stored in large ceramic jars with tight-fitting lids, sealed to keep out moisture and insects. A jar full of dried beans represents security, insurance, the knowledge that there will be food through the cold months when nothing grows, when the garden sleeps and gives nothing. It's a tangible manifestation of summer's abundance transformed into winter's security. By late September, most of the harvest is complete. The garden begins to look tired, exhausted from its months of production. The summer crops are finished or finishing. Many beds are now empty or nearly so. The plants pulled up, the soil bare. But there's still work to do, always work to do. Brother Thomas pulls up the spent plants and adds them to the compost heap. Everything that grew all summer, everything that produced so abundantly, now returns to the soil, beginning its transformation into next year's fertility. He digs over the empty beds, turning the soil, preparing it for autumn planting or for winter rest. Some beds will be planted with winter crops, hardy kale that will survive frost, leeks for early spring harvest, garlic cloves pushed into the soil to establish roots before winter truly arrives. The autumn work has a different quality from the spring and summer work. A different feeling, a different rhythm. There's less urgency now, less pressing need, but also a kind of melancholy. The abundant growth of summer is ending. The garden is preparing for sleep. The year is winding down, approaching its close. October brings the first real hints of winter. The days are noticeably shorter now, the sun lower in the sky even at midday. The mornings are cold, truly cold, with frosts sparkling on everything by the time matins ends and the monks file out of the chapel. Brother Thomas can see his breath in the pre-dawn darkness, small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly in the still air. The first frost is a significant marker in the garden's calendar, a line of demarcation between the growing season and the dormant season. It comes in early October usually, though sometimes late September if the autumn is particularly cold. Brother Thomas notices it immediately when he enters the garden that morning. The grass is white, crunchy underfoot. The leaves glisten with ice crystals. Everything that was soft and green yesterday is now stiff and sparkling. The frost kills the tender plants, the ones that can't survive freezing temperatures. The beans, which were still producing a few late pods, collapse, their leaves turning black and wilting. The last lettuce in the garden, a late planting that was doing well in the cool autumn weather, also dies, the leaves damaged beyond recovery. Any basil that was still growing in a sheltered spot succumbs. its soft leaves turning to black mush. But the frost also signals that the root vegetables are ready for their final harvest. Cold actually improves many root vegetables, Brother Thomas knows. The chill triggers changes in the plant's chemistry, converting starches to sugars, making them sweeter and more palatable. Parsnips especially benefit from frost. A parsnip harvested before frost is bland, starchy, almost unpleasant. A parsnip harvested after several good frosts is sweet, almost nutty in flavor, a completely different vegetable. Brother Thomas spends several November days harvesting the remaining root vegetables. It's slow, careful work. He uses a digging fork to loosen the soil around each plant, working the fork into the earth gently. Careful not to pierce the vegetables themselves. Damaged vegetables won't store well. Any cut or puncture becomes an entry point for rot. He loosens the soil, then pulls each root by its leafy top. They come up encrusted with damp earth, sometimes quite muddy if recent rain has soaked the ground. He knocks off the excess soil with his hand, then uses a knife to cut away the leafy tops, leaving about an inch of stem. The tops go to the compost heap, or to the chickens if they're still green and tender. Nothing is wasted, as always. The roots are carried to the cellar in baskets and packed in boxes of damp sand, layer upon layer. A layer of sand, then a layer of roots not quite touching each other, then another layer of sand, and so on until the box is full. The sand keeps them from drying out and prevents them from touching each other, which would allow rot to spread if any individual root began to decay. The cool, dark cellar is perfect for storage. The temperature stays just above freezing, cold enough to keep the vegetables dormant, preventing them from sprouting or deteriorating, but not so cold that they freeze and turn to mush. Properly stored in these conditions, root vegetables will last until spring, sometimes into April or May. They're essential to survival through the long winter months when the garden gives nothing fresh. Carrots, parsnips, turnips, beets, all carefully packed away. Box after box, the work of a week. Brother Thomas's back aches from the bending and lifting. But it's a satisfying ache, the ache of useful work completed. When he's done, when all the roots are safely stored, he feels a sense of accomplishment, of security. The cellars are full. The community will not go hungry. The kale is left in the garden, one of the few vegetables that can survive outside through winter. Kale is remarkably frost-hardy, one of those miraculous vegetables that actually improves with cold weather. Frost reduces kale's bitterness, making it more palatable, almost sweet. Throughout the winter, whenever the ground isn't frozen solid, whenever there's a mild spell, Brother Thomas can harvest kale leaves for the kitchen. He cuts the outer leaves, the larger ones, leaving the central growing point intact, so the plant can continue to produce new leaves. It doesn't grow much in winter, barely at all when temperatures are near freezing. But it stays alive, stays productive. A kale plant will often survive the entire winter and begin growing vigorously again in spring. It's not abundant growth, but it's something green and fresh when most of the garden is dormant or dead. And that's valuable beyond measure. The leeks, too, stay in the ground. They're extremely hardy, able to withstand temperatures well below freezing without damage. They're actually best harvested as needed, rather than all at once. A leek pulled fresh from the garden on a December day, perhaps after the ground has thawed slightly following a cold snap, is a small treasure. The flavor is sweet, mild, delicate. Leeks stored in the cellar never taste quite as good as leeks pulled fresh from the earth. December and January are the quietest months in the garden, the time of deepest rest. The days are short, terribly short. In the depths of winter, there are barely 8 hours of daylight, and often those hours are grey and dim, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. The weather is often wet, cold, and miserable. Rain falls frequently, sometimes turning to sleet or snow. The ground becomes too hard or too waterlogged to work. But even now, in the deadest part of winter, there are things to do. The garden never completely releases its claim on Brother Thomas's time. He repairs tools on cold afternoons, sitting in the relative shelter of the storage shed, or in a warm corner of the monastery. He sharpens the blades of hoes and spades, treating them first with oil to remove any rust that's developed, then carefully filing the edges with a metal file until they're keen again. A sharp tool makes every task easier, makes work faster and less frustrating. He mends the willow hurdles that border the raised beds, weaving in new withies where old ones have broken or rotted through. The work is fiddly, requiring patience and dexterity, but it's satisfying in its way. There's pleasure in repair, in taking something broken and making it whole again, in extending the life of useful things. He oils the hinges of the gate. Finally, a task he's been meaning to do for years. The hinges resist at first, stiff with rust and age, but eventually they accept the oil, and the gate swings more smoothly. Small improvements, minor repairs, keeping everything functional. There are also structures to build or rebuild. Brother Thomas constructs new supports for next year's bean rows, cutting hazel poles from the coppice and stripping off their bark, pointing one end of each pole so it can be driven into the ground easily. He makes repairs to the grapevine supports along the sunny wall, replacing broken ties, securing loose wires. He spreads manure from the stables on beds that will receive heavy feeding crops like cabbages next year. The manure is fresh, steaming slightly in the cold air, pungent, but not unpleasant to someone who's worked around it for years. It will break down over the winter, the frost and rain and soil organisms working on it, transforming it into something the plants can use. By spring, its nutrients will be available in the soil, ready to feed new growth. On milder days when the temperature rises above freezing and the sun breaks through the clouds, he does more extensive pruning on the fruit trees. Winter pruning can be more aggressive than summer pruning. The trees are fully dormant now, their sap withdrawn into the roots, and they can handle heavier cutting. He shapes the trees more deliberately, removes larger branches if necessary, maintains the open, vase-like structure that allows light and air to reach all parts of the tree. The work is cold. His fingers become stiff and clumsy, difficult to control. He has to stop frequently to warm his hands, tucking them under his arms or wrapping them in his habit, waiting for feeling to return. But he doesn't mind terribly. It's good to be outside, good to be doing something useful with his hands, good to be moving rather than sitting idle. And there's a particular beauty to the winter garden that Brother Thomas has come to appreciate over the years. The stark lines of the bare trees against grey skies, the architectural quality of the empty beds, their geometric patterns clear and defined, the way frost defines every twig and stem, outlining them in white, transforming familiar shapes into something new and beautiful. The tracks of birds in snow when it comes, delicate prints marking their passage. the profound stillness when snow muffles all sound. Brother Thomas often sees a robin in the garden during winter. The same robin year after year, or perhaps its descendants. It's hard to tell. It's a bold little bird, bright-eyed and alert. Its red breast a splash of colour in the grey and brown landscape. It hops near Brother Thomas as he works, watching with intelligent eyes, waiting. When he's digging or turning soil, the robin comes very close, sometimes within a few feet, looking for worms or insects that the digging exposes. Brother Thomas finds this companionship pleasant, this small connection with another living thing. He talks to the robin sometimes, quiet, one-sided conversations about the weather and the state of the garden, about what needs to be done and when spring might come. The robin cocks its head and listens, or seems to listen, then returns to its hunt for food, hopping and pecking, surviving winter day by day as all creatures must. The darkest part of winter, late December and January, is also the time for planning next year's garden. By late January, the days are beginning, just barely, to lengthen. The change is almost imperceptible at first. Just a few minutes of extra daylight, but it's there, noticeable to someone who pays attention. Winter's grip is loosening slightly. Spring will come, eventually, it always does. Brother Thomas thinks about what grew well this past year and what didn't, what succeeded and what failed. The cabbages were excellent, large and healthy and productive. The lettuce bolted too quickly in the heat of June. Perhaps next year he should plant it in a shadier spot, or plant it earlier to harvest before the hottest weather arrives. The peas had a good harvest, very productive. The beans had some issues with beetles in midsummer, but overall they did well enough. He thinks about crop rotation, that essential practice. It's important not to plant the same type of crop in the same bed year after year. Doing so depletes the soil of specific nutrients and can lead to a buildup of pests and diseases that target particular plant families. Brother Thomas does not understand the scientific principles behind this, the detailed mechanisms of soil chemistry and pest biology. But he knows from experience and from the accumulated wisdom passed down through generations that rotation is essential, that it works, that gardens that practice rotation are healthier and more productive than those that don't. This coming year, the bed that grew beans will grow cabbages. The nutrients the beans added to the soil will benefit the cabbages, which are heavy feeders. The bed that grew cabbages will grow onions, which are moderate feeders and will do well in soil that's been slightly depleted. The bed that grew onions will be planted with peas, which, like the beans, will add nitrogen back to the soil. And the bed that grew peas will receive a good layer of compost and grow beans again. A 4-year rotation, simple and effective, tried and tested over centuries. He also thinks about new things to try, small experiments, minor variations. Perhaps a different variety of bean, if he can obtain seeds. Perhaps more medicinal herbs for the infirmary, which Brother Anselm, the infirmarian, is always requesting. Perhaps a few more grapevines along the wall, now that the existing ones are established and doing well. But mostly, he thinks about doing what he's done before. What has worked? What's proven? There's comfort in repetition, in the known patterns, in the familiar cycle. The garden is not a place for dramatic innovation or risky experiments. It's a place for steady, patient, incremental improvement. Small changes, carefully considered, tested over time. This is the wisdom of traditional agriculture, the accumulated knowledge of countless generations of farmers and gardeners who learned what works and what doesn't, slowly, patiently, over centuries. February is often the hardest month, the coldest and most bitter. The early excitement of winter's first snow has long since faded. The holidays, Christmas, Epiphany, are past. Spring still seems impossibly far away. The stores in the cellar, once so abundant, are noticeably depleted. The apples are getting soft. Some of the stored roots are beginning to show signs of deterioration. Food is monotonous, meals repetitive. The same bean soup, the same turnip porridge, the same dark bread, day after day. Brother Thomas feels winter's weight during February. He's tired, bone tired, in a way that sleep doesn't quite remedy. The cold has seeped into his joints, into his bad foot especially, which aches constantly now. Moving is an effort. Getting out of bed for matins, when it's still deep dark and bitterly cold, requires real determination. The garden itself is dormant, deeply asleep. The beds are empty or nearly so. The soil frozen hard as stone. The fruit trees stand bare and seemingly lifeless, their branches black against the grey sky. Everything looks dead, though Brother Thomas knows it's not. It's just sleeping, waiting, enduring. But even in February's depths, there are signs of life if you know where to look. The earliest bulbs are beginning to push through the frozen earth. Snowdrops first, those brave little flowers with their nodding white heads. They appear in late January or early February, often pushing up through snow, seemingly fragile, but actually remarkably tough. They're always a welcome sight, the first definite sign that winter won't last forever, that the cycle is continuing, that spring will come. Brother Thomas checks on them daily, watching for their emergence. First, just the tips of leaves, pale green shoots breaking through the soil. Then the leaves elongate, growing taller day by day. Then the flower buds appear, small and green, gradually swelling. And finally, the flowers open, white petals marked with green, hanging like tiny bells. They're not much to look at, perhaps, small and unassuming. But to Brother Thomas they're beautiful, precious, a promise kept. The monastery observes Candlemas on February 2nd, 40 days after Christmas, a feast that marks the purification of Mary and the presentation of Jesus at the temple. But in agricultural communities, Candlemas has older associations too. It's one of the cross-quarter days, falling midway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. It's a time of blessing candles, yes, but also a time of looking forward to spring, of anticipation, of preparing for the work to come. After Candlemas, Brother Thomas begins to feel winter loosening its grip. Psychologically, if not yet physically. The days are definitely lengthening now, noticeably so. Sunrise comes earlier each morning, sunset later each evening. By mid-February, they're gaining perhaps 3 minutes of daylight each day, which adds up quickly. The difference between February 1st and February 28th is substantial, an hour and a half of additional daylight. Brother Thomas begins to prepare more actively for spring. On mild days, days when the temperature rises above freezing and the sun shines, he starts seeds indoors again. Cabbages, first, as always, sown in trays in the warming room. The process is the same as last year, as every year. Fill the trays with good soil mixed with compost, sifted to remove lumps. Create shallow furrows with his finger. Drop in the seeds, tiny things barely bigger than grains of sand. Cover them lightly. Water gently. Wait. The waiting is never easy, even after all these years. The first few days after sowing, nothing happens. The soil surface remains unchanged, blank, giving no sign of the life stirring beneath. But then, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days after sowing, the first green shoots appear, breaking through the soil surface, reaching toward the light. Miraculous, every time. A seed no bigger than a pinhead contains everything needed to create a plant that will grow waist high and produce a cabbage weighing 8 pounds. How is that possible? Brother Thomas doesn't know, can't explain it, but he marvels at it every time. He also repairs cold frames during February, preparing them for early use. Cold frames are simple wooden boxes with old glass windows laid over the top, creating a miniature greenhouse. They protect early plantings from frost while allowing light in. Warming the soil, extending the growing season at both ends. Brother Thomas checks all the frames, replacing any broken glass, repairing damaged wood, making sure they'll be ready when needed. On the very coldest days when going outside is truly miserable, he stays indoors more and works on indoor tasks. He sorts through saved seeds, checking their viability, discarding any that show signs of mold or damage. He counts what he has and makes a mental list of what he'll need to obtain from the seed merchant when the man makes his spring rounds. He cleans pots, scrubbing them with sand and water, removing any soil or residue from last year's use. Clean pots reduce disease problems. He mends baskets, reweaving broken sections, replacing handles. He checks on the stored produce in the cellar, removing any apples or roots that are beginning to rot, making sure spoilage doesn't spread. The work is quiet, contemplative, almost meditative. There's no urgency to it, no pressure. Just simple tasks that need doing, work that keeps his hands busy and his mind occupied during the long, dark evenings. As February progresses toward March, signs of spring multiply. The birdsong increases, becomes more varied and energetic. The blackbirds begin their adorned chorus, musical and complex, announcing territories, attracting mates. The sparrows chatter more actively. The first bumblebees appear on warm afternoons, large and fuzzy, visiting the earliest flowers. The hazel catkins in the coppice lengthen and release their pollen, yellow clouds that dust everything nearby. The willow trees show the first hints of green, their branches taking on a yellowish tinge as the buds begin to swell. The grass in the orchard, brown and dead-looking all winter, begins to show green shoots mixed with the brown, new growth emerging. Brother Thomas feels his own energy returning as the days lengthen. The bone-deep tiredness of midwinter begins to lift. His movements become easier, less effortful. He finds himself waking before the bell for matins sometimes, his body responding to increasing light levels, his internal rhythms shifting with the season. He's itching to get back to active gardening, to return to the work he loves. His hands miss the feel of soil, the texture of plants, the physical engagement with living things. Winter has been long, and he's ready for it to end, ready for spring to arrive. ready to begin again. Chapter 9. Spring's return. The cycle begins again. 4:0800, 4:35 intercal. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, but then more obviously, winter releases its grip. The change happens gradually, then suddenly. Early March still feels like winter. Cold mornings, frost on the ground, bare trees. But by mid-March, something has shifted. The air feels different, softer, warmer. The light is different, clearer, brighter. Spring is arriving. By late March, there's no doubt. Spring is here. The garden is waking from its long sleep. Brother Thomas stands at the garden gate one morning, after Lord's, and simply looks, taking it all in montage. The transformation from a month ago is remarkable. The beds that were frozen and lifeless are now showing green shoots. The fruit trees that were stark black skeletons are now covered with swelling buds, some of them beginning to break open, showing white or pink. The soil has thawed completely, its surface dark and moist, ready for work. Brother Thomas crouches down and takes a handful, feeling its texture, assessing its readiness. It crumbles easily in his hand, neither too wet nor too dry. Perfect. The soil is ready. The time has come. Over the next few weeks, Brother Thomas works steadily, preparing beds, turning soil, spreading compost. The work is familiar, the same work he does every spring, has done for 15 years now. But it never becomes routine, never loses its meaning. Each spring feels new, fresh, full of possibility. He plants peas in late March, just as he did last year, in trenches lined with dry bracken. He covers them carefully, waters them gently, waits for them to germinate. 2 weeks later, tiny green shoots appear, exactly as they did last year, as they do every year. The cycle continues. He transplants the cabbage seedlings that were started indoors, setting them carefully into compost-enriched soil. They look small and vulnerable, but Brother Thomas knows they'll grow quickly once established. By summer, they'll be substantial plants, providing food for the community. He plants bean seeds in late April, after the soil has warmed sufficiently. The process is exactly the same as last year. Create furrows, drop in seeds, cover them, pat down the soil, water gently. The movements are automatic, his body knowing what to do without conscious thought. This is knowledge that lives in muscle and bone, not in mind. The herb garden bursts into life. The perennial herbs that seemed dead all winter are suddenly covered with new growth. The sage sends up fresh grey-green shoots. The thyme spreads new stems across its patch. The mint, that irrepressible plant, is already growing vigorously, already needing to be checked. Even the tender herbs like basil can be planted now, in late April, when the last frost has passed. The fruit trees bloom in succession through April and early May. The plum tree first, covering itself in white flowers, a cloud of blossom against the grey stone wall. Then the pears, their white flowers glowing in the spring sunshine. Finally the apples, some varieties with white flowers, others with pink or pink-tinged white, each tree beautiful in its own way. The garden is alive with bees during bloom time, hundreds of them visiting the flowers, gathering nectar and pollen, pollinating as they go. Without bees, there would be no fruit. Brother Thomas watches them work, grateful for their presence, grateful for their industry. By May, the garden is fully awake, growing vigorously. The peas are climbing their supports, tendrils grasping, pulling themselves upward. The beans have emerged and are sending up their first true leaves. The cabbages are establishing well, beginning to form their characteristic rosettes. The onions and leeks are thickening. Everything is green and growing, full of energy and life. The worst is past. The hunger month of late winter, the cold, the darkness. Now there's abundance ahead, the promise of harvest, months of productive growth. Brother Thomas works long days now, the lengthening daylight allowing more work. But he doesn't mind. This is what he's been waiting for through the long winter. This is what he loves, being in the garden, hands in soil, working with plants, participating in the great cycle of growth and harvest and rest and growth again. The cycle continues. Spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. Year after year, decade after decade. Brother Thomas grows older. His hair, what's left of it, is entirely grey now. His face is more deeply lined. His movements are slower, more careful. His bad foot hurts more often. But the work continues, and so does he. Eventually, he knows there will come a day when he's too old to manage the garden. The abbot will assign the task to a younger monk, someone with the strength and energy the work requires. Brother Thomas will teach him everything he knows. When to plant, when to harvest, which plants need sun and which prefer shade, how to make good compost, how to prune fruit trees properly, how to read the weather and the seasons. And that younger monk will tend the garden, just as Brother Thomas did, just as Brother Anselm did before him, just as monks have tended this garden for generations, just as monks will tend it for generations to come, God willing. The work goes on, continuous, unending. Seeds are planted, plants grow, harvests are gathered, food is preserved. The garden sleeps, then wakes, then sleeps again. The cycle repeats, season after season, year after year, century after century. It's not dramatic. It's not exciting. It's simply life in its most fundamental form. The sun rising and setting, the seasons turning, the earth producing. Human hands working in cooperation with the soil, with the rain, with the sun, coaxing sustenance from the land. Planting and tending and harvesting, over and over, the same tasks repeated endlessly. Yet somehow, never quite the same, always new, always fresh, always meaningful. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, but then more obviously, winter releases its grip. The change happens gradually, then suddenly. Early March still feels like winter. Cold mornings, frost on the ground, bare trees. But by mid-March, something has shifted. The air feels different, softer, warmer. The light is different, clearer, brighter. Spring is arriving. By late March, there's no doubt. Spring is here. The garden is waking from its long sleep. Brother Thomas stands at the garden gate one morning, after Lord's, and simply looks, taking it all in. The transformation from a month ago is remarkable. The beds that were frozen and lifeless are now showing green shoots. The fruit trees that were stark black skeletons are now covered with swelling buds, some of them beginning to break open, showing white or pink. The soil has thawed completely, its surface dark and moist, ready for work. Brother Thomas crouches down and takes a handful, feeling its texture, assessing its readiness. It crumbles easily in his hand, neither too wet nor too dry. Perfect. The soil is ready. The time has come. Over the next few weeks, Brother Thomas works steadily, preparing beds, turning soil, spreading compost. The work is familiar, the same work he does every spring, has done for 15 years now. But it never becomes routine, never loses its meaning. Each spring feels new, fresh, full of possibility. He plants peas in late March, just as he did last year, in trenches lined with dry bracken. He covers them carefully, waters them gently, waits for them to germinate. 2 weeks later, tiny green shoots appear, exactly as they did last year, as they do every year. The cycle continues. He transplants the cabbage seedlings that were started indoors, setting them carefully into compost-enriched soil. They look small and vulnerable, but Brother Thomas knows they'll grow quickly once established. By summer, there'll be substantial plants, providing food for the community. He plants bean seeds in late April, after the soil has warmed sufficiently. The process is exactly the same as last year. Create furrows, drop in seeds, cover them, pat down the soil, water gently. The movements are automatic, his body knowing what to do without conscious thought. This is knowledge that lives in muscle and bone, not in mind. The herb garden bursts into life. The perennial herbs that seemed dead all winter are suddenly covered with new growth. The sage sends up fresh grey-green shoots. The thyme spreads new stems across its patch. The mint, that irrepressible plant, is already growing vigorously, already needing to be checked. Even the tender herbs like basil can be planted now, in late April when the last frost has passed. The fruit trees bloom in succession through April and early May. The plum tree first, covering itself in white flowers, a cloud of blossom against the grey stone wall. Then the pears, their white flowers glowing in the spring sunshine. Finally the apples, some varieties with white flowers, others with pink or pink-tinged white, each tree beautiful in its own way. The garden is alive with bees during bloom time, hundreds of them visiting the flowers, gathering nectar and pollen, pollinating as they go. Without bees, there would be no fruit. Brother Thomas watches them work, grateful for their presence, grateful for their industry. By May, the garden is fully awake, growing vigorously. The peas are climbing their supports, tendrils grasping, pulling themselves upward. The beans have emerged and are sending up their first true leaves. The cabbages are establishing well, beginning to form their characteristic rosettes. The onions and leeks are thickening. Everything is green and growing, full of energy and life. The worst is past. The hunger month of late winter, the cold, the darkness. Now there's abundance ahead, the promise of harvest, months of productive growth. Brother Thomas works long days now, the lengthening daylight allowing more work. But he doesn't mind. This is what he's been waiting for through the long winter. This is what he loves, being in the garden, hands in soil, working with plant mutant, participating in the great cycle of growth and harvest and rest and growth again. The cycle continues. Spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. Year after year, decade after decade, Brother Thomas grows older. His hair, what's left of it, is entirely grey now. His face is more deeply lined. His movements are slower, more careful. His bad foot hurts more often. But the work continues, and so does he. Eventually, he knows there will come a day when he's too old to manage the garden. The abbot will assign the task to a younger monk, someone with the strength and energy the work requires. Brother Thomas will teach him everything he knows: when to plant, when to harvest, which plants need sun and which prefer shade, how to make good compost, how to prune fruit trees properly, how to read the weather and the seasons. And that younger monk will tend the garden, just as Brother Thomas did, just as Brother Anselm did before him, just as monks have tended this garden for generations, just as monks will tend it for generations to come, God willing. The work goes on, continuous, unending. Seeds are planted, plants grow, harvests are gathered, food is preserved, the garden sleeps, then wakes, then sleeps again. The cycle repeats, season after season, year after year, century after century. It's not dramatic, it's not exciting. It's simply life in its most fundamental form. The sun rising and setting, the seasons turning, the earth producing, human hands working in cooperation with the soil, with the rain, with the sun, coaxing sustenance from the land. Planting and tending and harvesting, over and over, the same tasks repeated endlessly. Yet somehow never quite the same, always new, always fresh, always meaningful. Brother Thomas sits on the bench by the well one evening in late spring. It's a mild evening, pleasant, the kind of evening that makes you grateful to be alive. The sun is setting, painting the western sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The air is soft, carrying the scent of growing things, of earth and grass and flowers. He's tired from the day's work, but it's a good tiredness, the satisfying exhaustion that comes from useful physical labor. His muscles ache slightly, but it's not unpleasant. His hands rest on his knees, calloused and stained with soil. The hands of a working man, the hands of a gardener. He looks around the garden, taking it all in. The neat rows of vegetables growing in their beds. The herb garden with its geometric patterns. The fruit trees with their spreading branches. The compost heaps behind the shed. The tool shed with its weathered boards. The stone walls with their lichen and moss. All of it familiar, all of it beloved. This is his life's work, this small plot of land. Not grand, not impressive by worldly standards. Just a modest garden feeding a modest community. But it's enough. It's always been enough. He thinks about the years he's spent here, the 15 years since he took over from Brother Anselm, and the years before that when he was learning, watching, helping. He thinks about all the seeds he's planted, thousands upon thousands, all the weeds he's pulled, all the water he's carried from the well, all the compost he's spread, all the vegetables he's harvested, all the fruit he's picked. It's been a life of repetition, of routine, of doing the same tasks again and again. Some might find that boring, monotonous. But Brother Thomas has found meaning in it, has found peace. There's something deeply satisfying about this kind of work, about tending living things, about participating in the cycle of growth and harvest, about feeding people with food you've grown with your own hands. He's learned patience from the garden. You cannot hurry a seed. You cannot force growth. You can only provide the right conditions and then wait, trusting in the natural processes, trusting in the seed's inherent knowledge of what to do. He's learned acceptance. Weather comes as it will, rain or drought, frost or heat, and the gardener must work with what comes, must adapt, must accept what cannot be controlled. Some years are good, some years are difficult, but the work continues regardless. He's learned attention. A gardener must notice small things, the color of a leaf, the texture of soil, the presence of a few aphids, the first signs of drought stress. Small problems caught early can be addressed. Small problems ignored become large problems. He's learned that death feeds life, that nothing is wasted, that what seems like an ending is actually a beginning. The compost heap has taught him this. The way waste transforms into wealth, decay into fertility. Most of all, he's learned gratitude. The garden is generous, giving far more than seems possible from such a small space. Seeds smaller than pinheads become plants producing pounds of food. The soil, properly dinned and tended, gives abundance year after year. The rain falls, the sun shines, plants grow. It's miraculous, really, when you think about it. Utterly ordinary and completely miraculous at the same time. The stars are beginning to appear now, one by one. The sky is darkening from purple to deep blue to black. The garden is settling into night. Somewhere an owl calls, that wavering hoot earring across the fields. Bats flicker through the twilight, hunting. Brother Thomas rises slowly from the bench. His joints protest slightly, stiff from sitting. He makes his way across the garden, through the gate, into the cloister. Tomorrow he'll rise before dawn for matins. He'll pray and eat and return to the garden. There will be weeding to do. There is always weeding to do. But tonight, there is rest. Tonight, there is peace. Tonight, there is the quiet knowledge that he has done his work, that the garden is tended, that the cycle continues, that all is well. And it is well. It has always been well. The garden gives, he tends. The community is fed, the seeds are saved. Next year, the cycle begins again, and the year after that, and the year after that. As long as there are monks to tend it, the garden will continue. As long as there is soil and rain and sun, plants will grow. As long as there are seeds, there is hope. Brother Thomas enters the dormitory quietly, not wanting to disturb those already asleep. He removes his sandals, lies down on his narrow bed, pulls the rough wool blanket over himself. Sleep comes quickly these days. His body is tired from honest work, his mind peaceful. There are no anxieties keeping him awake, no worries that can't wait until morning. He sleeps, and while he sleeps, the garden rests too, gathering strength for tomorrow's growth. The peas grow a little taller in the darkness, adding cells, reaching upward. The cabbages expand their leaves slightly. The onions swell imperceptibly. The fruit on the trees develops, growing heavier, sweeter, preparing for harvest. Life continues. Growth continues. The cycle continues. Time passes, measured not in hours or days, but in seasons and harvests, in plantings and prunings, in the eternal rhythm of the garden. This is how it has always been. This is how it will always be. The garden endures. The work continues. The earth gives. hands tend, and that truly is enough.